The story begins beneath the towering stone walls of a majestic northern fortress. Duke Ilian stood resolute, his armor gleaming in the dim light as his troops lined the battlements behind him. Known as the unyielding master of the northern borders, he now faced a threat greater than anything he had anticipated, an endless tide of the undead, their grotesque forms cloaked in a swirling, toxic fog that spread like disease across the battlefield. One of his men, eyes wide with fear, called out to him and pointed urgently. From the heart of the enemy ranks, a lone figure emerged. It was Dorian, the undead knight. A legend drenched in dread. He was a warrior so powerful that even 10 elite knights would hesitate to face him in mortal combat. A grim-faced soldier turned to the Duke and proposed a retreat, suggesting they brace for a siege. He insisted there was no hope of victory with their current numbers. But Duke Ilian rejected the idea outright. He declared that if the city gate were to fall, the entire nation would fall with it. He emphasized that today, here and now, they must hold the line, regardless of the cost. Then, mid-sentence, the Duke faltered. His eyes widened. A blur of motion streaked across the field toward the undead ranks. A lone figure, charging with inhuman speed. The Duke stared, trying to grasp who this reckless warrior could be. Murmurs rose among the soldiers. Recognition dawned. It was Lord Urin Rox, scion of the southern Marquisate of Rox. One soldier noted that Urin fought with daggers. Another expressed disbelief, questioning how anyone, daggers or not, could hope to defeat Dorian. They muttered that it was suicide. But then, Urin struck. His daggers slashed through Dorian, and the monstrous knight's armor and flesh began to dissolve as if submerged in acid. Shock rippled through the ranks. More undead approached, but Urin moved like a phantom, his blades slicing through corpses that crumbled into melting heaps. The men could hardly believe their eyes. One of them muttered in awe, asking if Urin might be a saint sent from heaven. Another scoffed, calling the idea laughable. Urin, however, was no saint. He fought with a cold, precise purpose. Invisible to the others, glowing system messages flickered before him. They reported gained experience and a level up in the Firebone Mountain technique, a poison that ate through the very marrow of the undead. The 10,000 poisons absorption technique had also activated, devouring the surrounding miasma and fueling the progression of the 4 heavenly poison arts. To himself, Urin declared that anything useful to his body would be his to claim. 6 months earlier, Urin had awakened in a lavishly decorated room, the softness of the bed beneath him unfamiliar. Confused, he scanned his surroundings. A beautiful woman stood beside him. She asked if he had awakened, her voice calm. He stared at her, captivated by her beauty and struck by her unusual clothing and the sword at her hip. She asked about his condition, but before he could respond, she informed him that she would summon the priest immediately and exited the room before he could question her further. Left alone, Urin tried to make sense of the situation. As he turned to the mirror, what he saw stunned him. He let out a startled cry, staring at the reflection of a chubby, childlike figure where his mature, attractive body had once been. He couldn't believe it. He convinced himself it had to be a dream. Perhaps if he slept again, he'd wake up in reality. The door opened again. A man in priestly garb entered, greeting him as, "Young master." Behind him came another figure. An older man whose commanding presence was impossible to ignore. The moment he laid eyes on Urin, his face contorted with fury. He seized Urin's hand and scolded him, calling him a disgrace and demanding to know if he had finally chosen to wake up. Urin had no idea who the man was, but his overwhelming presence was terrifying. The priest stepped in, urging the elder to wait with punishment since the young master had just regained consciousness. Reluctantly, the man backed down, persuaded by the priest's reasoning. After a brief examination, the priest reported that Urin's mental state seemed stable and his wounds were nearly healed. He expressed cautious relief. But the older man dismissed the relief with disgust. He snarled that he would have preferred Urin to remain unconscious, or dead. He then accused him of assaulting his fiancée and declared that he was a monster. He reminded him that he was already 19, that his younger brother had awakened his aura, while he, the eldest son, only grew fatter and more useless by the day. Urin, bewildered, silently questioned what an aura even was. The older man then ordered him to apologize to his fiancée the moment he could walk again. When Urin asked who she was, the man shouted that her name was Alia and warned that if she didn't forgive him, his life was finished. Cornered, Urin nodded and muttered a shaky agreement. The man ended the lecture with a final threat. He was not to bring further shame to the Rox family. At the mention of the name Urine Rocks, a chill ran through the young man's spine. He suddenly understood. He was Urine Rocks. And the furious man before him could only be one person, Marquis Wellington Rocks. Unthinkingly, he spoke the name aloud. Wellington's fury exploded. Enraged that his son dared use his first name, he struck him hard. Urine's body flew across the room and hit the ground with a thud. Servants rushed to restrain the Marquis as Urine lay stunned, barely conscious. Even as pain clouded his vision, part of him clung to the hope that this was all a dream. But then he woke again. Still dazed, he blinked at the ceiling. Another woman entered, her white hair unmistakable. She asked if he had awakened. He called her Aaron, and she confirmed her name, watching him curiously as he clutched his head in despair. He asked her if he had tried to chase Alia and was beaten unconscious. Aaron, surprised by his formal tone, said yes. Lady Alia had struck him down when he tried to assault her. Realization crashed down on him. He was doomed. The full horror of his situation settled in. He was inside the web novel he himself had written. Worse still, he hadn't become the protagonist. He had become Urine Rocks, a pathetic villain who tormented the hero and died like a fool in a back alley. He panicked, refusing to accept it. He screamed that this wasn't just a webtoon. Aaron, confused, asked what that word meant. Urine began to cry. He remembered every shameful detail he had written about Urine Rocks, lazy, talentless, arrogant, relying solely on his family's name. In the novel, he lost Alia to the hero, then tried to kill the protagonist in a fit of jealousy and died in disgrace. He wondered how he could possibly survive in this world. He had no idea what talents Urine might have. But then he remembered something crucial. He had written this story. He knew about secret opportunities and hidden treasures the protagonist hadn't discovered yet. He had to act fast. Trying to get up, he stumbled. The weight of his bloated body made movement difficult. Aaron rushed to him, asking if he was all right. He brushed her off. She urged him to rest. Suddenly, he froze. He realized something was missing, something he had expected to see. Then, as if summoned by his will, a transparent window blinked into view before him. It hovered in the air, revealing information about Aaron. Her traits: Swift Sword Level 2, Clear Mind Level 1, Aura Adaptation Level 1. And below, a bar marked, Affection. Reading 0. Aaron asked what was wrong. He told her he was just acting weird for a moment and sent her away. She nodded and left. Alone again, he summoned the window once more. The Swift Sword trait confirmed what he already knew. Aaron was naturally gifted. He then looked closer at the affection meter, wondering if it functioned like the love meters in dating sims. At least it wasn't negative, he thought. That was progress. Pushing forward, he tried to summon his own status window. It appeared instantly. Name: Urine Rocks. Special condition: Morbid obesity traits. Creator's Eye Level 1, 4 Heavenly Poison Arts, locked. Synchronization rate: 99.9%. His eyes lingered on the 4 Heavenly Poison Arts. That was from one of his favorite stories, where a heroine used poisons and hidden weapons. It didn't belong in a medieval fantasy setting, yet here it was. One trait caught his attention in particular: Tang Clan of Sichuan, locked. He pondered how such a thing existed here, and what might happen if he could unlock it. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the estate, a servant named Aaron spoke with the Marquis. The Marquis asked if Urine had awakened. Aaron confirmed that he had, though she noted that he seemed off, physically and mentally. She added that he had stumbled when he tried to stand. The Marquis was surprised. The priest had said Urine's wounds weren't serious. He then asked if Aaron had noticed anything strange. He noted that Urine, who would normally throw a tantrum when told to apologize to Alia, had accepted it quietly this time. The Marquis insisted that this calmness was only temporary, that the old Urine would return soon and seek revenge. Aaron, however, said she hoped the young master would recover and improve with time. The Marquis scoffed at Aaron's optimism, dismissing her belief in Urine with a bitter laugh. He admitted that even he, as Urine's own father, had long given up hope. With dry sarcasm, he added that he pitied her for wasting her time, and that she would have been better off living freely as a knight rather than attaching herself to someone so hopeless. Aaron said nothing in return. She simply stood in silence, the weight of her master's life hanging in her thoughts. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about the young master had changed, subtly, yet unmistakably. Meanwhile, Urine asked Aaron to take him to the training hall. He said he wanted to get some exercise. Aaron, startled by the unusual request, questioned his timing. But Yurin insisted. As they walked together through the vast garden that separated the residence from the training grounds, Yurin's mind remained focused. He considered the traits revealed by his new ability. The creator's eye let him read the stats of others, but the Tang clan of Sichuan trait remained locked. He guessed that his physical condition, specifically, his morbid obesity, might be the key obstacle. Exercise, he decided, was the first step. Yet, even walking proved difficult. The sprawling palace gardens, larger than several sports fields, left him breathless. He had never felt more aware of his body's weight dragging him down. With every servant they passed, he caught glimpses of their status windows. Affinity scores flashed in harsh red. Loathing, disgust, hatred. He couldn't blame them. The original Yurin had been cruel, arrogant, and lazy. The memory of who he used to be in this world filled him with quiet disgust. After what felt like an eternity of trudging, they finally reached the third training hall, one of the less used spaces. Inside, someone else was already training. The moment Yurin's eyes landed on him, a new window appeared. Affinity. -91 desire to kill. Hi, the man's name was Rika Alian. His trait read Swift Sword, level 1. Rika offered a mocking smile and asked why Yurin had come to train. His tone dripped with sarcasm. Yurin recognized him instantly and stiffened in response. He replied that of course he remembered Rika. Turning quickly to Aaron, Yurin whispered a question, asking what had happened between him and this man. Aaron, surprised, asked if he genuinely didn't remember. She explained that years ago, when the Marquis had forced Yurin to begin training, Yurin, furious and defiant, summoned Rika, who was then a trainee knight, and slashed his face with a sword while laughing. After that, the Marquis stopped trying to train him. Yurin was horrified. The memory was new to him, but it confirmed what he already suspected. The original Yurin had been a complete monster. Deciding that it was better to avoid unnecessary conflict, he asked Aaron if there was another training space he could use, somewhere more isolated. Aaron told him about the fourth hall, located far from the main building. It was poorly equipped and mostly just an empty field. To Yurin, it sounded perfect. He said that if he was going to lose weight, he'd do it properly, and asked her to take him there. When they arrived, Yurin immediately thought about the Tang clan of Sichuan. He recalled that they were masters of throwing knives and subtle assassination. In an attempt to awaken the trait, he grabbed a dagger and hurled it with force. Nothing happened. Disappointed, he gave a strained laugh and claimed he was just throwing for fun. He figured he needed to improve his stamina first. Aaron suggested he start with some light running. Yurin replied that he would train alone and told her to go ahead and focus on her own exercises. And so he began to run. Elsewhere, the Marquis stood at a window, watching in stunned silence. He could hardly believe his son had not only come to the training hall but had actually started exercising. He questioned how long such strange motivation could last. 3 weeks passed. To everyone's astonishment, Yurin didn't miss a single day of training. He pushed himself every morning and night. His weight dropped steadily, and his appearance began to change. The Marquis, upon seeing him, remarked that such determination was only fitting of his son. He studied Yurin closely. Without the layers of fat, his son had become handsome. For the first time in years, the Marquis wondered if his son was finally maturing. In his room, Yurin stood before the mirror, examining the changes in his body. His progress was undeniable. Yet the Tang clan of Sichuan trait remained locked. He decided to give himself 1 more month. If that didn't work, he would have no choice but to steal the protagonist's fated encounter. Just then, Aaron entered with his evening meal. A system window appeared the moment the lid came off the bowl. Sharon's soup. A traditional Rox family dish that promotes fat burning and muscle growth. Customarily eaten after training. Yurin scowled at the familiar sight. Aaron noticed and asked if he was tired of it. He admitted that eating the same soup for 3 weeks straight had worn him down. Aaron's demeanor grew stern. She asked him whether his goal was simply to slim down or to become a knight. Yurin answered with enthusiasm, declaring that he intended to become a knight. Aaron scolded him, reminding him that even the Marquis himself consumed Sharon's soup after every training session. As the heir of the Rox family, he had no right to complain. Yurin muttered in agreement and began eating, telling himself that the tradition was outdated, but worth enduring if it helped him transform. Midway through the meal, he paused. The taste was different. Before he could question it further, a system message flashed. Warning. Poison ingested. He froze. but almost instantly, another message followed. Condition met. Tang clan of Sichuan unlocked. Stunned, he stared at the screen. He hadn't expected this. Unlocking the trait through poisoned food. It made sense in a twisted way. He had just stepped into the legacy of an assassin clan known for thriving under poison. Elsewhere in the manor, the Marquis was still pondering his son's transformation. He found himself repeating what he had already admitted. Yuren had indeed grown handsome, but had he truly matured? A knock interrupted his thoughts. Someone asked for permission to enter, and he allowed it. His second wife, Kenna, stepped inside carrying a tray with tea. She asked what he was staring at so intently. The Marquis replied that he had simply been admiring the beauty of the garden. Kenna smiled, clearly pleased. She said that she had personally taken care of the garden, and the Marquis complimented her skill without hesitation. As the Marquis sat in quiet conversation with his wife Kenna, she shifted the topic with casual precision, asking when he intended to officially name Colin as his heir. She reminded him that he had previously promised to make the announcement by the end of the month and that, now that everything had been decided, it would be best to expedite the process. Her tone was gentle, but her words held weight. The Marquis, momentarily caught off guard, hesitated. He said that the situation might take longer than expected. Kenna frowned subtly and reminded him again of his commitment. She emphasized that he had given his word. Colin was to be declared heir this very month. The Marquis sighed and explained that recent developments had complicated things. He said that, as she had probably heard, Yuren had shown signs of a sudden awakening. As the eldest son of House Rocks, Yuren could still become a worthy successor if his current progress continued. The Marquis added that it would be foolish to overlook his efforts so quickly. Feigning warmth, Kenna agreed. She said that she, too, had heard about Yuren's change, and admitted she had been worried about him. Now, however, she claimed to be relieved by the news. She added that it must be comforting for the Marquis as well, to see his eldest son finally act with some sense. The Marquis chuckled, but his laughter was tinged with sarcasm. He said that it was amusing how a single slap from a woman could do what years of discipline couldn't. When Kenna asked again about the matter of succession, the Marquis explained that 3 weeks of training wasn't enough to base such a decision on. He said that he preferred to observe Yuren a little longer. However, he gave his word that if Yuren regressed, the title would immediately pass to their first son, Colin. Satisfied, at least on the surface, Kenna invited him to join her in the bedroom once he finished his work. She left the room with graceful composure, but once out of sight, her face darkened. The rage simmering beneath her elegant exterior surged to the surface. Her expression twisted with fury, and she silently vowed revenge on Yuren Rocks. Meanwhile, Yuren himself remained seated in his room, still processing what had just occurred. The notification from the system echoing in his mind. The Tang clan of Sichuan trait had been unlocked. He thought about how absurd it was that ingesting poison was the requirement. Then, he recalled the details listed in the Sharon Soup's system description and tried scrolling further down. There, in the extended notes, he found an update in the database, an annotation about the Han-Yang herb. It was noted as a medicinal plant with faint paralytic properties. In small doses, it was harmless to adults, but with accumulation, it could gradually lead to paralysis and, eventually, death. Erin's voice snapped him back to the present. She asked why he had stopped eating. Snapping out of his daze, Yuren resumed eating with exaggerated enthusiasm. As he chewed, his thoughts sharpened. Someone had poisoned him. But who? He remembered the plotline from his own novel. Around this time, Colin was supposed to be officially declared heir. If that was delayed because of Yuren's sudden training, then whoever had a stake in Colin's rise must have decided to act. His suspicions began to form quickly and pointedly. Another system message popped up. Condition met. Weak paralysis poison unlocked. After finishing the last spoonful of soup, Yuren smiled strangely and told Erin that the dish was so delicious it had brought him to tears. He asked her to leave him alone for a while. Erin accepted with a polite nod, wished him a good night, and exited the room. Alone again, Yuren summoned his status window. It opened with a shimmer, displaying his current condition, still overweight, mildly poisoned, with minor muscle soreness from training. His traits and synchronization rate remained visible, but now, by focusing like he would in a VR game, he realized he could pull up deeper layers of information. Focusing on the Tang clan of Sichuan trait brought up 3 subcategories: poisons, hidden weapons, and martial arts. All were still locked, but accessible. He decided to start with the poison section. A massive list appeared. weak paralysis poison, truth serum, soul-killing smoke, and more. All were locked, gated behind a leveling system. To unlock even the weakest poison, he learned, he needed to activate an internal technique. It made sense. The Tang clan's mastery depended on channeling internal energy to control poison. He backed out of the poison list and opened the martial arts tab to search for an internal cultivation method. Several were listed: dark poison arts, thunder needle arts, and 10,000 divine poisons energy. A warning flashed. Only one internal technique could be chosen. As a longtime fan of wuxia, the choice was obvious. The dark poison arts specialized in poison, the thunder needle arts leaned toward concealed weapons, but 10,000 divine poisons energy promised mastery of both. It required longer training, but it offered more versatility. He selected it without hesitation. Instantly, he felt something shift within his mind. The incantations and energy pathways of the technique embedded themselves in his consciousness like muscle memory. He stripped off his shirt, settled into a meditative pose, and began circulating the energy. For the first time, he felt the flow of qi, his body's life force, moving through his meridians. He guided it deliberately, focusing it into his dantian, the central energy node of the body. Time disappeared. Morning arrived, and he hadn't slept at all. Yet, he felt no fatigue. In fact, he felt invigorated, his limbs brimming with energy. He could even sense the life around him. He could count the birds outside his window by sensing their energy alone. He discovered that by directing qi to his head, he could now summon the system interface without a mirror. His progress showed 10,000 divine poisons energy, level 1, 10%. He sensed a familiar aura approaching. The door opened. Erin stepped in to wake him and noticed the untouched bed. She commented that he hadn't slept. Yurin confirmed it. She urged him to rest and skip training, but Yurin refused. He insisted that he felt excellent and couldn't afford to waste time. Erin, reluctant but understanding, agreed to prepare breakfast before his session. As she closed the door, she paused and wondered aloud when the young master had begun developing muscle. Later that morning, Yurin stood at the training field, holding a dagger. As he took aim, a crosshair flickered into view before his eyes. Just like in a first-person shooter game. He grinned and threw the dagger. It struck dead center. Erin, who had been watching, stared in surprise. A system window appeared. Hidden weapons trait unlocked. She asked what he had just done. Yurin, feigning ignorance, said he didn't know, that maybe it was the result of a month of training. He glanced at her and noticed something new. She was flustered. It was the first time he'd seen her genuinely surprised. Deciding to test his limits, he drew another dagger. As he threw, he felt a surge of internal energy, fiery and precise, rising from his core. The blade rocketed through the air, struck the center of the target, and shattered it completely. Erin gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Emboldened, Yurin turned to her. He asked if she could sense anything strange coming from him. Erin shook her head. She said there was nothing unusual, only that his weight loss since yesterday was dramatic. She added that while his steady progress had been visible, today's change was especially striking. Yurin realized then that Erin couldn't detect qi. No one could. Internal energy was unique to him in this world. He understood what that meant. He possessed a power no one else had access to, a secret weapon. With a smile, he picked up another dagger and threw it again, this time, splitting the first blade still stuck in the target. Erin, stunned, asked if she could try. He agreed. She threw a dagger. It missed completely. Yurin laughed, remarking that he had finally found something she wasn't good at. Erin frowned, clearly annoyed. At that moment, a system window appeared before Yurin, glowing faintly in the air. It announced the completion of the memory of Sachendunga and the unlocking of a new skill, Straight Strike. The description explained that this ability enhanced the force and speed of his throws, not just with familiar weapons, but with anything from stones to wooden sticks to iron swords. Anything he held could become, momentarily, a weapon of deadly precision. As Erin remained puzzled by her failed attempt with the dagger, Yurin silently picked up a broken wooden sword from the rack nearby. Without a word, he asked her to take a few steps back. Erin, surprised by the request and even more confused by the object in his hand, watched warily, not knowing what he intended. Yurin felt a surge of internal energy rush from his dantian, coursing through his arms and into the blade. He hurled the broken sword with precision. It shot forward like a cannonball, piercing the center of the target with a crack and shattering the wooden frame completely. Erin stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. She screamed out in shock, demanding to know what kind of power she had just witnessed. Yuren shrugged, masking his triumph with false modesty. He said perhaps it was just the power of good practice. Erin immediately rejected the explanation. She insisted that what she had seen defied everything she knew. No amount of training could produce such destructive force from a broken wooden sword. Then, with a shift in tone, Yuren addressed her seriously. He said that he was well aware she reported everything he did to the Marquis. The sudden admission caught Erin off guard. She didn't deny it. Yuren, however, didn't scold her. Instead, he asked for a favor. That she keep what she just saw a secret for the time being. He explained that he was currently conducting personal experiments, and promised to reveal everything to her in due time. He simply asked for patience. Erin hesitated, then nodded in agreement. Later that evening, Yuren observed one of the palace chefs, Pero, leaving the kitchen. Activating the creator's eye, Yuren examined him. A status window appeared. Poisonous touch, level 1, agile movement, level 1, and affinity, neutral. That was all he needed to confirm his suspicion. The trait poisonous touch explained how the poison had ended up in his food. Yuren narrowed his eyes. This was the man who had tried to kill him. Now it was time for a real test. Focusing his energy, Yuren activated the weak paralysis poison skill from a distance. The result was instant. Pero's body went rigid mid-step and collapsed onto the cobblestone pathway, unmoving. A new system window appeared above him, displaying a timer. Paralysis duration 1 hour. Yuren approached calmly, lifting the chef's frozen body over his shoulder. He carried him to a quiet alley behind the palace grounds. As Pero began to regain some movement in his eyes, Yuren knelt beside him and began to speak. He asked if Pero understood who he was and threatened him plainly, stating that if he wanted to live, he would answer everything truthfully. Since Pero couldn't speak yet, Yuren introduced a simple method. Blink once for yes, twice for no. Pero blinked once to show understanding. Yuren's first question came sharp and direct. Was he the one who had poisoned the soup? One blink. Yes. He followed with another. Was the poison used the Han-Yang herb? Again, one blink. Yes. Then came the question that mattered most. Was it Marchioness Kana who had ordered the poisoning? This time, Pero blinked twice. No. Yuren's gaze narrowed. He warned Pero that lying would cost him his life, claiming he could tell when someone wasn't being truthful. He repeated the question, more forcefully this time. Was it Kana? Pero hesitated for a moment, but again blinked twice, no. This time, Yuren believed him. He saw no fear in Pero's eyes, no hesitation that hinted at deceit. The answer felt honest. If Kana wasn't behind it, then someone else was pulling the strings. Yuren decided not to press further, yet. He pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth and forced it into Pero's mouth. He then told him that what he had just ingested was a rare form of paralysis poison, one that would slowly liquefy his organs within a month if left untreated. Yuren said he alone possessed the antidote and warned Pero that if he didn't obey every order, he would suffer a slow and agonizing death. When Yuren asked if he understood, Pero blinked once, wide-eyed with terror. Satisfied, Yuren placed a hand on Pero's forehead and released the poison's grip. Pero gasped as movement returned to his limbs. Now able to speak, Yuren asked him one final time, who gave the order? Pero answered. The name came out with difficulty, Knight Commander Karax Levington. Yuren immediately recognized it. Karax was Kana's older brother, a man who had risen to power only due to her influence and marriage to the Marquis. Pero explained that Karax had given him the order to kill Yuren within the year, under the pretense of illness. Yuren's suspicions were confirmed. Kana might not have issued the command directly, but her hand was still present. Karax was acting as her proxy. Still, Yuren pushed the revelation aside for now. This wasn't the moment to strike. Instead, he handed Pero a folded sheet of parchment. It was a list, various poisons, categorized and detailed. He told Pero that with his knowledge and black market access, he would be responsible for obtaining all the items listed. He said that Karax's gold would be more than enough to fund it, and that he was to start gathering them immediately, beginning with whatever he had in stock. When Pero nervously asked why he needed so many poisons, Yuren silenced him with a glare. He said that asking questions wasn't part of the deal. Pero shrank back and swore obedience. Before letting him go, Yuren gave one last command, a cruel, ironic twist. From now on, Pero was to make sure every bowl of his soup contained a dose of Hanyang herb. Pero looked horrified, his face pale with disbelief. Yuren laughed openly, amused by his own theatrical sense of control. As Pero hurried away, Yuren thought to himself how easily the cook had swallowed the bluff. The poison he'd been fed was nothing more than dried leaves. The real lesson here wasn't about fear, it was about control. Yuren looked up at the night sky and reminded himself of the urgency. He still had to master the martial arts of the Tang clan of Sichuan as fast as possible. Events were accelerating. If the world followed the plot he had written, then something terrifying was just around the corner. That night, as the moonlight bathed the stone corridors in silver, Pero returned with a cloth bundle pressed to his chest. Inside were the poisonous herbs he had on hand, ingredients he had never dared to carry so openly before. Yuren, waiting in the quiet of his room, watched the cook approach with cold calculation. As soon as the bundle was opened, a system window blinked into existence before Yuren, listing each herb and its properties in precise detail. With the creator's eye assisting him, he identified every poison with effortless confidence. Pero, visibly surprised, asked how Yuren could name such rare and obscure toxins without hesitation. Yuren, keeping up his charade, claimed that this knowledge was trivial for someone like him, though in truth, he relied entirely on the system's information. Curious, Yuren asked why Pero had even carried multiple poisons when the Hanyang herb alone should have been enough to kill him. Pero explained that the herb's effect was too slow and that the body could build resistance over time. By mixing it with Yakrakba, the potency became deadlier and more difficult to detect. Yuren immediately grasped the implication. Combining poisons wasn't just about lethality. It was about precision, control, and unpredictability. When Yuren inquired how Pero knew so much, the cook's face darkened. He revealed that at the age of 8, he had been sold to the Levington family and raised under the brutal tutelage of a poison master. There had been 20 children, he said, but only he survived. Yuren noted the restrained bitterness in his tone and realized something useful. Pero bore a deep grudge against the Levingtons. That made him not only knowledgeable, but manipulable. Pleased with the information, Yuren praised him and dismissed him for the night. Once alone, Yuren prepared for his next stage of training. Without hesitation, he took each herb and consumed it raw. As expected, a barrage of system messages flooded his vision, noting the ingestion of multiple poisons. Another message followed. The body of 10,000 divine poisons is absorbing toxic compounds. But then a warning flashed across the window. Danger. Poison threshold exceeded. Immediate breathing meditation required. Without delay, Yuren dropped into a seated position and began deep meditation. He focused every bit of will into circulating the energy of his internal technique. His goal was clear. He had to reach the second stage of the 10,000 divine poisons energy. His survival depended on it. By the time dawn arrived, his body was still and composed. The door opened quietly, and Erin entered with the intent to wake him. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she took in the sight before her. Yuren sat shirtless, his skin gleaming with sweat, muscles newly defined and carved with the lean strength of someone who had trained for years, not hours. She stared, speechless. At that moment, another system window appeared before Yuren. 10,000 divine poisons energy, advanced to stage 2. New martial art acquired. Little dragon step poison techniques unlocked. Venom pulse, lingering fog, bone freezing needle. Erin, baffled, asked what had happened to him, but before Yuren could respond, she gagged, covering her nose. The foul stench surrounding him made her recoil. Yuren quickly realized what it was. Just like in the novels, when internal energy surged and martial breakthroughs occurred, the body expelled impurities. He glanced down and grimaced. It was worse than he imagined. He moved to open the window, but Erin shouted for him to stop. She ordered him to head straight to the bath before the smell killed someone. Yuren raised his hands in surrender and obeyed. After washing away the stench of toxins and sweat, Yuren joined Erin again, and together they made their way to the training grounds. As they walked, he began experimenting with his new footwork. Little dragon step, a fluid and unpredictable movement style ideal for evasion in sudden bursts of speed. Each motion felt strange at first, like walking on uneven ground. Erin watched him with concern, asking if he was feeling all right. She noted that he looked like a drunk stumbling through the halls. Yuren laughed and said he was fine, waving off her concern. She remained unconvinced and asked if he really intended to visit the first training hall, pointing out that it would be crowded with knights today. Yuren nodded. He explained that he simply wanted to observe how the knights trained. As they entered the hall, heads began to turn. Whispers sparked. Some recognized Aaron, the young master's attendant. But when their eyes landed on Urin, confusion flickered across their faces. They stared at him, slimmer, taller, refined, and tried to place the face. One knight hesitantly recalled the rumors about the young master's sudden weight loss. Another gasped, putting the pieces together. Disbelief spread. Just a month ago, Urin had been a bloated embarrassment. Now, he looked like a completely different man. They whispered about sorcery, hidden potions, divine blessings. Urin, with his enhanced senses, heard every word. Amused, he scanned the crowd and spotted a young knight practicing with disciplined grace. The technique was familiar, textbook Rock's family sword stances. Aaron leaned in and confirmed that what the knight was practicing was the foundational form taught to all knights of the household. She advised Urin to watch closely. And then he realized who the knight was, Cried, one of the main characters in the novel he had written. In the original story, Cried would go on to become a loyal ally of the protagonist. Urin hadn't described Cried's early days in the story, so it surprised him to find him already here, training diligently. He made a mental note, Cried might prove valuable later. Turning back to the rest of the knights, Urin activated Creator's Eye. Their affinity ratings flashed before him. Hostility, disgust, contempt, and even one with murderous intent. Perfect, he thought. A testing ground. He decided to try out lingering poison, a slow-acting toxin that spread through the lungs before attacking the organs. He chose one of the knights at random and activated the skill, directing a subtle flow of energy toward the man. Moments later, the knight dropped to his knees, clutching his chest in agony. Panic spread. His comrades rushed to him, some shouting for a priest. He writhed in pain for seconds that felt like minutes, then suddenly stood, perfectly fine. The pain had vanished. Confused and angry, the others accused him of faking it. Some mocked him. Others scolded him for causing a scene. The afflicted knight couldn't explain what had just happened. Urin, watching from a distance, smiled to himself. The poison had worked, and more importantly, it had passed undetected. After the success of his first test, Urin decided it was time to push further. He selected a more complex and volatile poison from his newly unlocked arsenal: soul-killing smoke. This particular poison induced intense hallucinations within a targeted range, causing disorientation, fear, and in some cases, full psychological collapse. With the knights still bickering and unaware of his intent, he activated the technique. Almost immediately, one of the knights jerked backward, eyes wide in panic. He screamed that a monster was attacking him. The others turned, confused, until the illusion took hold across the group. One by one, they began to shout and recoil in terror. Erin watched from the side, bewildered. She couldn't understand what had triggered the sudden chaos. The knights stumbled, fell, and flailed across the training ground, some swinging their swords at invisible enemies, others backing into walls or curling up on the ground. Each one saw something different: savage beasts, demons, walking skeletons. And each of them was utterly consumed by fear. For several moments, the training ground descended into madness. Eventually, the poison's effect began to fade. The knights blinked, looked around, and realized that nothing was there. Confusion swept through them. They glanced at one another, breathing hard, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Urin, watching from a distance, determined that pushing the test any further might provoke actual injury, or worse. He felt a quiet satisfaction. The poison had worked flawlessly. Turning to Aaron, he said the area had become too chaotic for proper training. He suggested they leave and head instead to the 4th training hall. She agreed, though she remained distracted by the bizarre scene they were leaving behind. As they made their way through the palace grounds, a maid called out to Urin and informed him that he had a visitor. She announced that Lady Ilia Marquis had come to see him. Inside the guest room, Ilia sat waiting, her resolve firm. She had come today to end the engagement once and for all. She had tolerated too much, and the incident that had led her to strike Urin weeks ago had been the final straw. Urin, aware of who was waiting, braced himself. He recalled that in the original story, this was the point when Ilia Marquis began to demand the annulment of their engagement. The original Urin had selfishly refused, dragging the situation out. Urin sighed. He had no intention of repeating that mistake. When he entered the room, Ilia looked up, and froze. The man standing before her wasn't the spoiled, bloated noble she had known. He was lean, composed, and disturbingly calm. She didn't even recognize him. She asked who he was, genuinely confused. Yurin answered that it was him, Yurin Rocks. Her confusion deepened. She mentioned the rumor she'd heard, that he had lost weight through training, but admitted she dismissed it as nonsense. What she saw now didn't seem possible. How could he have changed so drastically in such a short time? Yurin responded plainly. He said he had trained hard, and that after she struck him, he had reflected on himself and realized the need to change. Ilya eyed him warily, questioning his intentions. She wondered aloud if he was planning some form of revenge, if this sudden humility was a trap. Yurin denied it without hesitation. Then, unexpectedly, he dropped to one knee and thanked her. He said it was because of her that he had come to his senses. He apologized deeply for his past behavior. He acknowledged her right to sever the engagement if she wished, and said he would accept her decision. Stunned, Ilya asked again who he really was. Yurin answered without flinching, Yurin Rocks, the former scoundrel. His apology was genuine, and for a moment, she was at a loss. Yurin, watching her reaction, thought quietly to himself that the incident hadn't truly been his fault, but that of the body's previous occupant. Still, he had a reason for asking forgiveness beyond guilt. He activated Creator's Eye and brought up her status window. Traits: Kingdom Toppling Beauty, Sword Queen. Preference Level: -16, Hatred. The data told him everything. Ilya wasn't just another noble daughter, Sword Queen was a trait of immense power. It guaranteed that she would grow stronger over time, surpassing her peers, and in the story, she eventually saved the protagonist during his darkest moment. She also personally defeated one of the main antagonists. Yurin concluded that even if they ended their engagement, earning her favor was crucial. An ally like her could shift the tides of fate. Ilya ordered him to stand, asking if he truly meant what he said. Yurin confirmed with unwavering conviction. She demanded he swear an oath, one with real weight. As her aura flared and pressed down on him, Yurin recognized the moment. This was the same scene she had with the protagonist in the original story. Not him. He smiled internally and activated the 10,000 divine poisons energy. The pressure of her aura washed over him and vanished, completely repelled. Ilya's eyes widened. She had never experienced her aura failing before. Yurin seized the moment and solemnly swore never to return to his old ways. After a long pause, Ilya finally relented. Her voice softened slightly as she said she would be watching him closely from now on. One mistake, she warned, and the engagement would be over for good. Then, without another word, she turned and left. Yurin stood there in quiet amazement. She hadn't broken off the engagement. That, more than anything, surprised him. Outside the room, Ilya encountered the Marquis. He asked if she had come to a decision about the engagement. She responded that she had. She would not break it off. The Marquis, clearly caught off guard, asked her why. Ilya paused, seeming unsure herself. She said that she had heard rumors about Yurin's change and came to see for herself. At first, she thought maybe he'd simply reverted to the quiet, soft-hearted boy he'd been in childhood. But the man she met today wasn't the child she remembered. He was someone new, someone stronger. And for now, she said, she would trust that man. The Marquis asked if she was certain. Ilya, her expression unreadable, said that she was. Ilya's voice carried sharp steel as she added that if Yurin ever reverted to being the disgrace he once was, she would personally beat him to death with her own hands. The Marquis, rather than offended, burst into hearty laughter. He said that he admired her fiery nature and asked her to take good care of Yurin, as only someone like her could keep him in line. She declined his invitation to stay a few more days at the estate, explaining that she had told her father she was coming to break off the engagement. Remaining any longer would raise questions. The Marquis urged her to see Yurin before she left, but she refused again, saying that he was likely training, and she had no intention of disturbing him. Later that day, the Marquis summoned Yurin to his office. When Yurin entered, his father pretended not to recognize him, joking about the stranger in front of him. For a moment, Yurin panicked, thinking perhaps the Marquis had uncovered the truth about his identity. But the Marquis then laughed and told him how proud he was of the discipline and effort his son had shown recently. He then asked if Yurin knew why he had been summoned. Yurin answered confidently, saying he believed it was time to begin his formal training as a knight. The Marquis nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness, and said that indeed, it was time to teach him the swordsmanship of the Rocks family. However, Urin had another idea. He said there was something else he wanted to pursue. When he told the Marquis he preferred to learn the art of throwing weapons instead of traditional swordplay, the room froze. The Marquis stared at him in disbelief before scoffing, calling such techniques disgraceful tricks used by thieves and rogues. He added that throwing a dagger was worthless, useless against a knight's armor and even less effective against the scales of a creature like a Burek. But Urin pressed the matter, proposing a wager. If he could hunt a Burek using only a dagger, the Marquis would train him personally. The Marquis, irritated by what he called childish defiance, insisted that no amount of training could allow someone to pierce a Burek's scales without aura. Even with 100 years of practice, he claimed, it would be impossible. Urin pointed out that if the Marquis was so certain of his inevitable failure, there was no reason to refuse the bet. Amused by what he believed would be a valuable lesson in humility, the Marquis finally agreed. The terms were set. If Urin succeeded, the Marquis would recognize his preferred path and train him accordingly. If he failed, he would abandon his ambitions and follow his father's will without further argument. Urin, confident and more excited than ever, immediately began preparing. He knew how tough the Burek's scales were. After all, he had ridden the creature into existence himself. That night, he planned to consume more forbidden herbs to elevate his 10,000 divine poisons energy to the 3rd star, hoping to gain the edge he needed. Later that evening, Aaron visited him with a message from the Marquis, confirming the time of the trial. Noon the next day, in the first training hall, Urin asked her if she knew about the bet. She replied that everyone in the palace knew, and that most of them were laughing about it. She said the prevailing rumor was that Urin would either faint or flee in terror at the sight of the monster. In their eyes, he was still the laughingstock of the estate. When he asked if people would come to watch, Aaron confirmed it. The hall would be full. The Marquis hadn't restricted attendance, and the spectacle had spread like wildfire. Urin muttered that the whole thing had turned into some kind of twisted arena event. He asked for her opinion, and Aaron replied calmly that she believed tomorrow would be his day. That night, Urin reached the 3rd star in his internal technique. When the day of the challenge arrived, the first training hall was packed. Servants, knights, nobles, everyone had gathered to witness the show. Urin entered and found the crowd buzzing with anticipation. The Marquis asked if he was ready. Urin glanced at the sea of onlookers. The Marquis, feigning innocence, claimed he had only told his personal mage, and somehow the news had spread. He warned Urin not to embarrass the rock's name in front of such a crowd. At that moment, a senior mage stepped forward and began the summoning ritual. Urin watched, eyes wide. It was the first time he had seen magic performed live, and it mesmerized him. Then the ground trembled. A surge of electricity snapped through the air as dust exploded outward. A towering beast emerged from the summoning circle. The Burek. The monster, roughly 150 centimeters tall, had the grotesque shape of a bloated sea creature twisted by magic. A faint aura of static crackled around its body. The crowd recoiled in horror. Urin, however, watched it with a strange mix of curiosity and nostalgia. He recalled creating the Burek on a whim, while eating sashimi at a cheap restaurant and struggling to meet a publishing deadline. Without its limbs, it might have even looked cute. Without warning, the Burek lunged. The spectators screamed, but the Marquis raised his hand and ordered the knights not to interfere. Urin cursed under his breath, annoyed that no one had warned him the beast would attack the moment it was summoned. Still, the creature's movements weren't particularly fast. Urin took a steady breath, analyzing its scale patterns. The moment he focused, a crosshair appeared in his vision, his internal energy reacting, locking onto the beast's weak point. He threw the dagger with perfect precision. The blade whistled through the air and struck directly beneath the Burek's arm, an exposed, scale-less joint. The monster let out a shriek and collapsed. Dead. Silence blanketed the hall. A heartbeat passed, and then the crowd erupted in cheers. They shouted Urin's name, praised the impossible feat, and called it nothing short of miraculous. Urin stood quietly, trying to process what had just happened. He had killed the beast in one hit. The Marquis was speechless. He turned to his son and demanded to know how he had done it. Urin simply said that he had aimed well and hit the right spot. The Marquis refused to believe it. He said it made no sense. A Burek couldn't die from a single dagger throw, its scales were too thick. Urin smiled slyly, raising his voice just enough for the entire crowd to hear. He reminded everyone of the terms of the bet, and that a great marquis like his father would surely not go back on his word. The knight commander stepped in, trying to preserve the Marquis's pride. He explained that Yurin's throw had landed in a rare unarmored gap, and that this had to be pure luck. The Marquis, clearly unsettled by what had just unfolded, insisted that the bet be redone. Yurin, however, stood firm and refused. The Marquis, not one to give up easily, proposed a new condition. If Yurin managed to win again, he would grant him a single wish, no matter what it was. But if he failed, he would have to submit to his original path and learn the swordsmanship of the Rock's family as planned. This time, the opponent would not be a monster like the Burek, but a knight. Yurin paused only for a moment before agreeing. He recognized the opportunity immediately, especially when he spotted Knight Commander Karox Levington among the crowd. For a brief moment, he considered the idea of challenging Karox himself. Humiliating him in public would be satisfying. But Yurin quickly discarded the thought. It was too soon. Karox still served as his connection to the supply of rare poisons through Pero. For now, it was smarter to leave him untouched. He turned to the Marquis and admitted that it wouldn't be fair to pit him against a full-fledged knight. He requested that the duel be held instead against a trainee knight. The Marquis, intrigued by his sudden humility, accepted. Then came the twist. Yurin asked for the right to choose his opponent himself. The Marquis agreed, curious to see where this was going. Without hesitation, Yurin named his choice, Cried. Cried stepped forward when summoned, offering a respectful bow. The Marquis gave him a mission, one he didn't expect. He told Cried that his task was to face Yurin in a duel and, if necessary, correct his misguided path. Cried was visibly shaken by the order. He looked to the Marquis in disbelief, but the Marquis asked if he was unwilling to carry it out. Cried swallowed his hesitation and accepted. Yurin, sensing the discomfort, told him not to worry, he would make it simple. He announced that he would throw only 3 daggers. If Cried could block all 3, Yurin would concede defeat. The declaration sent a ripple through the crowd. The Marquis was visibly irritated, interpreting it as arrogance. He urged Cried to teach his son a lesson. The audience joined in, roaring with excitement. Some shouted that if Cried lost, he'd go without meals for a week. Others made jokes about what punishments awaited him if he failed. The energy in the hall crackled with tension. Amidst the noise, a soft voice from the crowd wished Yurin good luck. He smiled faintly, encouraged. As the duel began, Yurin activated Creator's Eye, locking his sights on Cried. Unlike the Burek, Cried's body displayed multiple vital points. Every mark was potentially lethal. Yurin, unwilling to inflict real harm, decided to aim for the sword. With a deep breath, he threw the first dagger. It struck Cried's blade with such force that the clash echoed like a cannon blast across the hall. Cried was pushed back, barely maintaining balance. The impact alone cracked his sword. The Marquis blinked, stunned. The sheer power that had come from a simple dagger was unlike anything he'd seen. Yurin told Cried that this strike was only a warning, proof that underestimating him was a mistake. Then, with calm composure, he announced that the second throw would carry his full strength. He activated Straight Strike, focused his energy, and hurled the second dagger. Cried braced himself. He raised his sword in defense, but as the blade met the dagger, it shattered under the pressure. The force dropped Cried to his knees. The weapon clattered to the ground beside him, broken. The hall fell into silence once again. The Marquis began to speak, requesting a private conversation with Yurin to settle the matter. But Cried interrupted. He said that the bet wasn't over. There was still 1 dagger left. The Marquis tried to wave it off, but Yurin turned to Cried and asked him directly. He asked if Cried was truly willing to end things like this, without a final result. He reminded him that a knight's pride demanded victory or defeat, not ambiguity. Cried lowered his head, gritting his teeth. Then, suddenly, he stood and demanded a replacement weapon. His aura flared to life, vivid, wild, and undeniable. The crowd gasped. The berserker trait had awakened. Yurin wasn't surprised. He had written this very scene into the story. Cried, pushed to his physical and emotional limit, would unlock his aura and reveal his true potential. This, Yurin thought, was the perfect opportunity to test one of his more advanced techniques. Cried now stood, sword in hand, exuding a blazing aura that rivaled veteran knights. The Marquis, though impressed, grew concerned. Yurin showed no fear, only quiet confidence. The final throw began. Yurin channeled his internal energy and activated the curved mountain technique, which sent the dagger into a spiraling, unpredictable trajectory. Cried narrowed his eyes, confused by the strange movement. He assumed Yurin was mocking him, and his frustration flared. He slashed at the dagger with all his might, but the weapon veered midair, swerving past his blade and striking him cleanly in the shoulder. Cried roared in pain. The crowd, unable to comprehend what had happened, watched in silence. Some murmured that the dagger looked slow, wondering why Cried reacted so strongly. But Yurin knew the truth. He had infused more internal energy into this throw than the previous two. The pain Cried felt was real and deep. Before the situation could escalate further, the Marquis stepped forward, raising his hand. He declared the match over and acknowledged Yurin's victory. He said they would speak privately, later. After the duel, as the commotion settled, Yurin approached Cried, who was still kneeling and clutching his injured shoulder. Without a word, Yurin placed a hand over the wound and activated the internal energy absorption technique. In moments, Cried's pain vanished completely. Startled, he looked up at Yurin and thanked him warmly, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. He apologized for underestimating him, admitting that when he first saw the final dagger moving slowly, he had thought Yurin was mocking him. But now, he said, he understood, it was no trick, but a masterfully executed technique. Cried continued, concluding aloud that such a refined skill couldn't have been learned in just a month. Therefore, Yurin must have been hiding his power all along. His imagination ran even wilder. He speculated that perhaps Yurin was secretly part of an elite group dedicated to protecting the Rock's family, enduring years of humiliation in silence as a selfless shield against hidden enemies. Yurin listened, increasingly amused, realizing that Cried's personality skewed toward wild theories and conspiracies. When Cried offered his unwavering service, pledging to assist in the fight against any secret enemies that might surface, Yurin noticed a change in his status window. Cried's affinity had risen to 26, now marked as favorable. Yurin didn't bother correcting any of the misunderstandings. He simply nodded, saying they would speak again soon. Cried departed with newfound purpose, shouting that he would spread the truth, that Yurin had never been a scoundrel, only a hidden guardian. After he was gone, Erin approached, praising Yurin's performance. She said he had fought well and asked curiously about the unusual technique he used at the end. Yurin replied that it was a new technique he'd recently developed and asked what she thought of it. Erin admitted that she had already replayed the entire scenario in her head. If it had been her facing that technique for the first time, she said, she would have lost. But now, having seen it, she believed she could block it. Yurin smiled, realizing this was due to her clear mind trait, an extremely rare ability. He reminded her that with her talent and years of knightly education, she could have easily become a proper knight had she not become his personal maid. He asked if she was truly satisfied with her current position. The question caught her off guard. Later, the Marquis summoned Yurin to his office. When Yurin entered and addressed him as, "My lord," the Marquis immediately scolded him, saying that when they were alone, he expected to be called father. Yurin was surprised by the sudden informality, but followed suit and spoke plainly, as requested. Then the tone shifted. The Marquis asked about the technique Yurin had used in the duel, stating that he had searched through the family's martial manuals and found nothing even remotely similar. He said such a technique couldn't possibly be learned in a single month, not even by a genius. When pressed, Yurin replied that he couldn't reveal the entire truth, but he had prepared a story in advance, anticipating this moment. He explained that during one of his training sessions, he had gone to the upper library in search of helpful books. There, he stumbled upon an old tome that fell from a top shelf. When he opened it, strange engravings covered the pages, and a blinding light emerged. Before he could react, the contents had been absorbed into his mind, and the book vanished. The Marquis's eyes widened. He said that such an object could only be a grimoire, a legendary artifact where ancient masters inscribed their techniques to be passed down through generations. Yurin, inwardly amused, thought to himself that of course he knew what a grimoire was. After all, he had created the concept himself as part of the story's lore. The Marquis, completely convinced, said that the attic library held so many texts from their ancestors that even he didn't know them all. He added that Yurin's discovery was nothing short of divine fortune. Yurin nodded, calling it the jackpot of a lifetime. True to his word, the Marquis said he would honor the terms of their agreement. He would no longer force Yurin to pursue swordsmanship. Instead, Based on the additional clause in the bet, he asked Urin to name his wish. Without hesitation, Urin replied that he wanted the position of heir. The room fell silent. The Marquis, clearly stunned, hesitated. Urin asked, voice laced with sarcasm, if he was going to break his promise now. The Marquis, caught in his own words, admitted he had no choice. It was within his authority, and he would grant the wish. Urin then shifted tone. He said he understood that naming him heir would stir trouble. There would be opposition, and Lady Kenna in particular would cause a storm. Therefore, he said, he would relinquish his wish, this time. The Marquis exhaled deeply and thanked him with heartfelt sincerity. Urin thought to himself that he never had any interest in the position to begin with. Becoming heir meant being shackled to political duties, losing the freedom he needed. Instead, he preferred to hone the martial arts of the Tang clan of Sichuan and roam the world in pursuit of opportunity. The Marquis then asked him to make another wish. Urin said that he wished to establish his own knightly order and appoint both Aaron and Cried as its founding members. The Marquis, relieved, said the request was more than acceptable. He added that Aaron's talents were too valuable to remain limited to the role of a maid. Urin thanked him and then made one final request. Since Aaron would no longer serve as his attendant, a replacement was needed. He proposed Pero, the kitchen worker, and asked that the appointment seem like it came from the Marquis himself. The Marquis eyed him carefully, asking if anything had happened. Urin simply said he would explain in time. The Marquis, placing trust in him, agreed without further questioning. A quick glance at his status window revealed the Marquis's affinity level had risen to 74. Trust. Later that day, Urin gathered Aaron and Cried and formally declared the formation of his knightly order. He appointed both of them as his founding knights and urged them to continue training with unwavering discipline. Then he introduced their new member, Pero, his new personal servant. Aaron looked at Pero with suspicion. It wasn't long before she pulled Urin aside to ask why he had chosen the cook of all people to replace her. Urin calmly told her the truth. Pero was a spy. Aaron was stunned. He explained that Pero had been sent by Knight Commander Karox and Lady Kenna to poison and assassinate him. Aaron was even more confused, asking why he would allow such a person so close. Urin replied with a faint grin that Pero now only obeyed his orders. Just then, Cried interjected, asking a question of his own. Urin welcomed it. Cried pointed out that, despite being a small order, there should still be a vice captain. According to tradition, the role should go to the strongest among them. But Cried questioned Aaron's strength, saying that she looked too young, too fragile. Urin agreed with the logic and permitted a duel between them. Aaron, calm and composed, swiftly defeated Cried. Afterward, she pointed out the flaws in his technique. His attacks were too predictable. Cried accepted the defeat with grace. Urin then declared Aaron the vice captain of the order, and everyone applauded. As Pero left to prepare dinner, Urin decided to test a new ability. Watching Pero walk away, he focused on sensing his vital energy, his ki. Then, activating a technique from the Tang clan's internal arts, secret sound transmission, he funneled his energy into a message directed to Pero's mind. Pero froze, wide-eyed. The voice of Urin echoed inside his skull. Urin told him he was communicating telepathically. Pero, overwhelmed, immediately assumed it was some form of dark sorcery. Urin smirked. Pero muttered to himself that his new master must be a black magician, a poison-wielding warlock. Urin let him believe it. He saw no reason to correct a misunderstanding that only deepened his control. Urin asks whether the poison he requested is prepared. Pero answers that he'd only just managed to prepare Snake's Mind, an extract from 100 venomous snakes. Urin instructs him to liberally dose both the chair and the soup he will consume. Pero, visibly anxious, hurries to carry out the order. That night, while meditating, Urin realizes that his internal energy progress has stalled since reaching the 3rd star. With the realization that a global crisis looms, he decides that it's time to leave the Marquis and seek opportunities to develop his power. He informs his father of his intention to travel. The Marquis, assuming he meant the neighboring village, grants permission. Urin, hiding his true plans to journey farther, asks for a week's leave. The Marquis, noting his tireless efforts in training, approves the request and asks how many guards he needs. Anticipating reluctance, Urin initially says he needs no escort, which shocks the Marquis. Reminded that he is heir, Yurin backtracks and says he's only going to the nearest village. The Marquis warns him of how perilous the world is, especially with poisoning, which Yurin internally scoffs at. Realizing he must comply, he reluctantly agrees to take a guard. He sets his departure in 2 days, and the Marquis promises to arrange the escort. That evening, Yurin decides to slip away earlier. He summons Pero, who hesitantly arrives. Yurin asks for money, reminding him of the funds Karox provided for feeding snakes. Pero, frightened but obedient, hands over the gold immediately. Yurin also asks for the partial space bag he glimpsed when Pero handled poisonous herbs, a magical storage sack. Pero, puzzled, agrees to lend it. Yurin gives Pero a fake antidote, actually nothing but dried leaves, said to last a month. He tells Pero that he appreciates his help and that he'll rely on him from now on, promising a genuine cure soon. At dawn, Yurin slips out of the palace, leaving a note behind. He walks through the silent garden and encounters an old gardener, greeting him politely. He senses a powerful aura radiating from the man but chooses to ignore it for now. Crossing into the wild for the first time, Yurin heads to the neighboring village's magic tower. At the reception, he requests to use teleportation. The attendant asks if he's used it before. Yurin says no. When asked for his destination, he names Os Castle. The attendant warns that it's a far journey, and the cost is 50 gold pieces. Yurin pays the steep fee and registers under the alias Polion, a handle from his online gaming days. He is led to the teleportation chamber. After a short wait, a voice announces his arrival. Stepping out, Yurin finds himself in Os Castle's magic tower, greeted by a local attendant. Yurin is surprised by the lack of discomfort. Despite feeling a strange twisting, the attendant proudly explains that the comfort of teleportation is their tower's hallmark. Once outside, Yurin observes the distinct Western architecture and the bustling crowds of Os Castle. He searches through the blacksmith alley for the unicorn workshop until dusk. In a final alley, he meets a blacksmith working late. Yurin asks if he knows of a unicorn workshop. The smith replies that while no such shop exists, he intends to name his own smithy that soon. Yurin realizes he's found the right person. Activating Creator's Eye, Yurin inspects the smith. A status window reveals name, Garanox, traits, wargear crafting, fire affinity, and others. Yurin asks to see his weapons, and Garanox invites him inside. In the workshop, Garanox confides that business has been slow. His secluded location and perceived lack of skill turn customers away. Yurin examines the weapons on display, then scans them with Creator's Eye. Among them are 3 wind spirit swords, each blessed by Sylph, granting increased speed, agility, and movement, and the Great Flame Spirit Sword, blessed by Salamander, boosting strength, stamina, and resilience. Yurin asks if Garanox crafted them. The smith admits he did, but dismisses them as failures, claiming they became too heavy, even for strong individuals, to lift, which is why no one buys them. Yurin, inwardly excited, thinks these swords aren't failures, they've simply yet to meet a worthy wielder who could unleash their potential. He decides to purchase them, imagining they'd suit Uran, or perhaps Aran, perfectly. But he realizes they're not the treasure he's truly seeking. He asks Garanox if he might have any severely rusted weapons instead, intent still gathering the perfect piece for his journey. But to Yurin, fate had guided him precisely where he needed. Among the junk, he found the weapon he was looking for. Garanox offered the entire pile, for just 2 gold pieces. Yurin knew its true worth exceeded 200. In a bold move, Yurin offered Garanox a chance to close his failing shop and become his personal blacksmith. Garanox was stunned. Yurin introduced himself properly. Yurin Rocks of House Rocks, the South's invincible spear. Garanox fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the honor of such a visitor. Yurin had to ask him to rise, but Garanox remained kneeling, humbly awaiting instruction. He asked why someone of Yurin's stature would seek a poor blacksmith. Yurin explained that Garanox's craftsmanship, especially the meticulous sword hilts, spoke of genuine skill and sincerity. He predicted Garanox would awaken a special talent one day, and though he himself wondered if he had made that up on the spot, it worked. Garanox agreed to follow him. He admitted Yurin was nothing like the rumor of a delinquent he'd heard. To seal it, Yurin pulled the rusted dagger. He uttered awaken, and the weapon transformed into a radiant legendary blade, Agnes, the vestige of many forms. Yurin reflected that, In his story, the original hero was destined to claim it. A system window then appeared, asking whether to formalize a spiritual contract with Agnes. Yurin accepted. A flash, a shift, and then a voice reverberated inside his head. Mage Agnes, not a sweet tone as he'd envisioned, but brusque and dismissive. She scolded him for having no talent. He lacked mana, so how could he bind her? She mocked his claim to have learned the awakening words from the Great Prophet, a detail he'd concocted for consistency in his story. Yurin calmly explained that he was the author, and knew the weapon's true nature. It could split into two forms, adapting to any wielded shape. She was supposedly bound to come back when a sub-body was lost. To that, Agnes snarled that knowledge alone meant nothing. Without mana, the contract was meaningless. Annoyed by her arrogance, Yurin forced her into a ring using his internal energy, ignoring her cries of pain. Agnes shrieked as warm chi surged through her form, experiencing the power she'd underestimated. Yurin had just confirmed a critical breakthrough. Martial energy could substitute for mana to wield Agnes's abilities. That revelation shifted everything. With this newfound understanding, he finalized his arrangements with Garanox, telling the blacksmith he needed 2 days to wrap up his personal matters. They agreed to meet again in front of Oz Castle's Central Park at noon in 2 days. As Yurin wandered through the park later that day, he spotted Ilya standing nearby. The sight surprised him, and he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. It hit him. This was the exact location where, in the original story, the protagonist was supposed to meet Ilya for the first time. The timeline had clearly deviated. Ilya was equally surprised and demanded to know what he was doing there. Yurin explained that he had come to find a blacksmith. She raised an eyebrow at that, reminding him that House Rocks had more than enough blacksmiths. Yurin clarified that he wanted someone of his own, someone personally chosen. Ilya said that if he had informed her earlier, she could have helped. But Yurin reassured her, saying he'd already found the right person. Right on cue, Garanox appeared, slightly breathless and apologizing for being late. Yurin introduced him to Ilya, referring to her as his fiancée. At that moment, a knight interrupted them. Addressing Ilya as his squad leader, the knight asked who she was speaking with, noting that it was nearly time for their departure. Ilya introduced Yurin as her fiancé, Yurin Rocks. The knight, masked Malone, visibly stiffened, startled to encounter a noble from House Rocks in such a casual setting. He introduced himself as the leader of the 5th Squad of the Steelhammer Knights, under the Marquis family. Yurin immediately recognized Mask. He was one of the minor characters from his original story, stubborn, prideful, and a thorn in the side of the protagonist. In the story's original flow, this very scene had been different. A mysterious masked attacker was supposed to ambush Mask's squad. The protagonist would intervene, fight Mask in a heated confrontation, and Ilya would arrive just in time to stop them. That incident would mark the beginning of the protagonist's growing connection with her. But now, with Yurin in the protagonist's place, everything had changed. More importantly, Yurin knew that following this event, the protagonist was meant to accompany Ilya on a mission, one where he would save her life. That plot point mattered. Yurin couldn't track down the original protagonist now, and Ilya's survival was non-negotiable. He asked Ilya about her destination. She explained that there had been increasing reports of goblin activity near Asio Castle, and her squad had been ordered to scout and neutralize the threat. Yurin asked if she would allow him to join them. Ilya was visibly surprised and asked him why he would volunteer for such a dangerous mission. Yurin explained that as someone in training, he wanted to experience real combat, and observe her skills firsthand. Ilya warned him again about the risks, but he said confidently that running away was his specialty. After some hesitation, Ilya agreed and instructed Mask to provide a horse for both Yurin and Garanox. Mask objected, pointing out that neither of them possessed mana. He claimed they lacked both the ability to contribute and the protection needed to avoid being a burden. But Ilya shut him down with a sharp command, adding pointedly that if Mask had issues with leadership, he should have tried for the position himself. Before departing, Ilya told Yurin to stay close to her during the mission. It was too dangerous otherwise. Yurin nodded and ordered Garanox to hold on tightly during the ride. With that, they rode out. Upon arriving near the forested region surrounding Asio Castle, Ilya began issuing orders. She broke her unit into teams of 5, instructing each to search for goblin camps but to avoid initiating combat. Any discoveries were to be marked by launching a signal flare. The knights dispersed into the surrounding wilderness. Time passed, and darkness crept in, making it harder to track anything. As the sun dipped, Ilya finally decided to regroup and turn back. Then, a flare streaked into the sky. Moments later, another lit up from a different direction. Then a third, and a fourth. The knights were thrown into confusion, debating how many flares had gone up. Yurin calmly confirmed 4, though another knight insisted there had been 5. Ilya resolved to move toward the nearest flare to the west. Yurin's pulse quickened as he watched the grim scene before him at the sight of the first flare. Ilya's squad had arrived, only to discover all the soldiers dead, armor melted into grotesque shapes, evidence of a horror beyond anything they'd imagined. Shock rippled through the group. Ilya responded swiftly, ordering the unit to ride south toward the next flare. At the second location, the horror repeated. More bodies, the same melted armor. One knight urged the captain to press on. Time was slipping away. Yurin couldn't stay silent any longer. He jolted forward, his voice loud and urgent. The goblins were hunting them in fragmented groups, wearing them down one by one. If they continued piecemeal, no one would survive. He insisted they end the operation and fire a signal flare here to regroup all remaining forces immediately. A knight erupted in outrage, demanding to know who Yurin was to question orders, blaming him for this chaos. Yurin froze the knight with internal energy pressure, a silent, invisible force that caused the man to collapse from his horse, terrified. Ilya stared in bewilderment. She couldn't comprehend how Yurin had toppled him without physical contact. Yurin commanded the knight to know his place, and, trembling, the knight fell into silence. Turning to Ilya, Yurin gently reminded her that in the original story, she had resisted the protagonist's warning, an error that had nearly destroyed them. He asked her to judge wisely this time. Ilya looked around, taking in the corpses and the scattered forces, and nodded. She ordered the blue flare ignited instantly. Moments later, multiple knights responded. Lights flickered in the darkness as scattered forces began converging. Garanox murmured his admiration, asking if Yurin truly expected reinforcements to arrive in time. Yurin's reply was grim, most of them wouldn't make it. Garanox's face turned pale as he realized what Yurin meant. An enemy, Karuta, had already taken them down off-screen. The real battle was about to begin. Suddenly, a terrified scout burst through the group, shouting that they must flee. Ilya demanded to know what was happening just as an overwhelming goblin horde surged into view. Dozens, hundreds, swarmed across the clearing. Another knight screamed that their numbers were terrifyingly vast. Ilya froze, guilt washing over her. She murmured an apology to Yurin, fearing his death was now certain. Yurin steadied her with calm assurance. She would not die today. He stepped forward, resolve sharpening in his eyes. He called out. He would now test what they had trained over the last 2 days. He summoned Agnes to generate black iron bullets by proxy, a technique born from his mastery of the third-level body of 10,000 poisons. A system window appeared before Yurin. The black iron blast technique fired hidden weapons imbued with internal power, relying on detonations of black iron bullets. Yurin shouted for the goblins to receive his attack. He threw a bullet. It embedded in a goblin's weapon. Then, amid their confusion, exploded. A wave of destruction ripped through the front line. Screams and chaos erupted. The bullets returned. Yurin hurled them again and again. Explosions followed in rapid succession, decimating line after line of goblins. Ilya, awestruck, demanded to know what he had thrown. Yurin replied steadily, it was black iron blast, and he would explain the details later. Seeing the horde's strength falter, Ilya shouted to her knights, reminding them that victory was now within their grasp. She urged them to seize the moment. The knights, inspired, surged forward to engage the remaining enemy. In the thick of battle, one goblin tried to flee, but something red and massive intercepted it. A red hand snapped over the goblin's head, and it screamed before collapsing. Ilya turned, stunned, as a colossal red-skinned warrior emerged, giant, brutal, and holding the corpse of a slain goblin. Yurin's jaw tightened. The legendary goblin warrior, Karuta, had finally appeared. He thought grimly. Failure was not an option. If they could not defeat Karuta today, none of them would survive. The real fight had begun. Karuta roared, his reddish aura erupting in violent waves of wind. He swung his sword and took a stance, ready to charge at Ilya. She realized she couldn't counter his power and prepared to evade. At that moment, Yurin rushed forward to save her, scolding her for standing still. Together, They narrowly avoided Karuda's crushing strike as it shattered the ground, and Yurin carried Ilya to safety on his back. Once they stopped, he shouted that she had nearly died. Ilya barely heard him. The battlefield around them was silent. Every one of her soldiers lay dead. Karuda was already preparing his next attack. Yurin acted fast, pulling out a black iron explosive and hurling it at him. It landed near Karuda's ear and exploded, but when the smoke cleared, he was completely unharmed. Not a single scratch marked his skin. Karuda muttered something in his own tongue. Yurin was shaken. None of his attacks worked. He remembered that orc warriors were said to have skin as hard as steel, but seeing it in person was terrifying. Ilya, enraged at the slaughter of her subordinates, cursed him. She called his actions unforgivable and raised her sword, infusing it with aura. Charging forward, she struck fast and hard, but Karuda blocked her with ease. She kept attacking, her strikes relentless, yet his parries remained effortless. Jiranox and Yurin watched closely. Yurin thought that her strength was impressive, expected, even for the famed Sword Empress. Despite being early in her journey, she was already strong enough to push Karuda this far. Still, his steel-like skin and armor held firm. He stood unmoved, muttering again in his strange language, before suddenly releasing an immense burst of aura. Ilya froze. An orc using aura was impossible, or so she had believed. Karuda launched a fierce counterattack, and she barely managed to block. Just like in the original tale, she began to lose ground. Overwhelmed by his power, she finally collapsed. Karuda, untouched, advanced toward her. Her knights rushed to her side, helping her stand. Frustrated, Ilya admitted that she couldn't defeat him and ordered a retreat. But as Karuda closed in, Yurin stepped between them. Karuda spoke again in his language, but Yurin ignored him and drew a dagger, throwing it with all his strength. Karuda reflexively swung his sword, shattering the blade instantly. Yurin was stunned, until Karuda noticed a wound on his shoulder. It glowed, then erupted in a violent explosion that crippled his arm. Yurin laughed, explaining that the first dagger had been a decoy. The real one had been thrown from behind. Smirking, he remarked that while Karuda's skin was like steel, every armor had its weak points, and he intended to exploit them. Furious, Karuda swung his sword at Yurin. Startled, Yurin barely dodged the first strike, then the second, before firing another shot. He taunted Karuda, asking where he was going as the bullet exploded against him. Advancing confidently, he mocked the orc, saying he had no intention of being captured. Suddenly, Yurin noticed Karuda preparing to attack Jiranox. The orc leapt high into the air, sword raised for a killing blow. With no time to think, Yurin sprinted forward, determined to save him. He decided to use the dragon step technique, a lesser version, but he poured all his energy into it, forcing his body to its limit for speed. Just as the orc's blade descended, Yurin reached Jiranox and pulled him away. The sword struck the ground with a thunderous crash, shaking the earth. Karuda's eyes widened in disbelief at Yurin's speed, and Ilya, watching from afar, was equally astonished. She could hardly believe what she had witnessed. After saving Jiranox, Yurin realized the battle needed to end quickly. He drew his sword, Anyus, and commanded it to transform into the Bloodflower butterfly, a legendary hidden weapon from the Sichuan Tang family. In an instant, the sword dissolved into a storm of glowing butterflies, swirling with mysterious energy. Using the curved shot technique, Yurin launched them at the orc. Despite the chaos, Ilya found herself mesmerized by the beauty of the spectacle, quietly admitting its elegance. Karuda, however, was seized by instinctive fear. He swung wildly, cutting at the butterflies, but one landed on his chest and shone with blinding light before exploding. The blast was devastating. Karuda fell, his massive body collapsing with a final roar. Both Ilya and Yurin were stunned by the weapon's destructive power. Yurin had expected it to be strong but never imagined it could completely fell an orc warrior in one strike. The soldiers nearby trembled, stammering that the orc was finally dead and victory was theirs. But Ilya quickly regained focus, warning them that the fight wasn't over. Smaller orc forces were still scattered nearby. The remaining orcs, panicked by her command, began to falter. Without hesitation, she led her troops to finish them off. Jiranox soon approached Yurin, thanking him earnestly for saving his life. The battle had ended in victory. By nightfall, the last of the orc forces had been wiped out. Afterward, Yurin approached Ilya, asking if she was hurt. She assured him she was fine but admitted she owed him her life and didn't know how to thank him. Yurin only laughed, saying that helping each other was natural and not worth worrying about. Then he reminded her of her earlier question about his swordsmanship. With a calm smile, he explained that he had trained not in swordplay but in hidden weapons. Ilya was stunned, asking if he meant weapons like daggers. Yurin confirmed, saying that both the explosive orb and the butterfly technique were part of his hidden arsenal. Ilya was both impressed and overwhelmed by Yurin's mastery of hidden weapons. She realized that his skill went far beyond what she had imagined. Yurin, meanwhile, quietly hoped this encounter would expand her view of combat. Having been raised to believe the sword was the ultimate weapon, perhaps now she would recognize the power of other arts as well. A soldier soon reported that the magic pouch was ready. Upon hearing this, Ilya raised her sword and stated that even if they could not collect every fallen orc, they must at least take the remains of the orc warrior as proof of victory. Without hesitation, she began gathering the remains herself. Giranox, staring at the enormous corpse, shook his head in disbelief, remarking that the pouch would surely be ruined if they stored the remains inside. Ilya replied calmly that it was fine. The pouch had been designed for holding monster remains, so it would not go to waste. With that, she sealed the orc warrior's remains inside. Once finished, she turned to Yurin and announced that they had to leave quickly before the night grew too deep. They mounted their horses and set off, but their path was soon blocked by Musk and two other soldiers who appeared suddenly on the road. Narrowing her eyes, Ilya demanded to know where he had been, reminding him that a long time had passed since the signal flare. Musk flinched, clearly uneasy, and claimed they had gone too far ahead, been ambushed by orcs, and delayed while fighting them off. Ilya listened, her face unreadable, but suspicion flickered in her gaze. She questioned why only 2 soldiers had returned if his story were true. Musk hastily replied that the others had been slaughtered by stronger than expected orcs. Still unconvinced, Ilya ordered him to take her to the battlefield so she could see for herself. Musk hesitated, urging her to wait until morning, saying it was too dark and dangerous to travel back. But Ilya's voice hardened as she commanded that he guide her immediately. Realizing he could not escape, Musk exhaled shakily and stepped closer, pretending to explain the location. Then, without warning, he drew his sword and lunged at her. Caught off guard, Ilya's eyes widened, but before the blade could reach her, Yurin reacted instantly. He threw a dagger with flawless precision, striking Musk's arm and forcing him to drop his weapon. Musk cried out, falling from his horse and clutching his bleeding arm. Fury burned in Yurin's voice as he confronted him. He said that Musk's story had been foolish from the start. Any soldier who had just fought orcs would show signs of exhaustion or injury, yet Musk and his men were perfectly fine. He accused them of betraying their comrades, colluding with the orcs, and leaking information from within their ranks. Musk trembled violently, his guilt written across his face. Yurin's certainty came not from intuition but from knowledge. He knew every detail of this story because he was the one who had written it. Nothing escaped him. Ilya, her expression cold and resolute, raised her sword. Musk dropped to his knees, pleading desperately, insisting that his family had served the realm faithfully. But Ilya's gaze didn't waver. She dismissed his words as empty lies. With a decisive strike, she ended his treachery. Yurin watched her unwavering resolve and remarked that her strength and judgment were admirable. Ilya then ordered her knights to seize the remaining traitors. The 2 men collapsed, begging for mercy and claiming they had only obeyed Musk's orders. The following day at Aas Castle, morning turned to noon. Inside their quarters, Giranox tried to wake Yurin, who was still sound asleep. Slowly opening his eyes, Yurin asked what was happening. Giranox chuckled and told him it was already midday. With a teasing grin, he added that Ilya had arrived, wearing a striking black gown. That news made Yurin sit up in surprise, his mind instantly picturing the scene. When he finally looked up and saw her standing there, his first thought was to ask about the unexpected outfit, so different from her usual armor. Ignoring his question, Ilya calmly said that he needed to accompany her to her home. Her father, she explained, wished to meet him. Looking at her, Yurin found himself thinking that the rumors about her being the world's most beautiful woman were no exaggeration. Her grace and presence confirmed it. With no real alternative, he agreed to go with her, though a thought lingered in his mind. This was exactly how the story was meant to unfold. the moment when the protagonist saved Ilya and met Marquis Marcus for the first time. Ilya left the room, instructing Yurin to prepare himself and meet her outside. As she departed, Yurin secretly opened her status window and noticed something unexpected. Her affection toward him had already risen to favorable, all from saving her once. The discovery surprised him. In his eyes, it was an early but meaningful shift in their bond. When he finally joined her, she waited patiently, and together they set off. Their walk, however, was interrupted by a crowd of commoners. Upon recognizing Ilya, the people called out to her as the Ironblood Knight. Rumors had already spread that she was the warrior who had faced the terrifying orc without retreating. The title suited her perfectly. It was the same one she bore in the original story. Soon the crowd noticed Yurin at her side. The young women among them whispered excitedly, referring to him as the Steel Mage, admiring his looks and composure. Yurin was startled by this sudden title, but it made sense once he realized how the rumor started. The surviving soldiers had described how he had manipulated steel in battle, mistaking his hidden weapons for magic. Ilya, a faint blush on her cheeks, turned to him and expressed deep gratitude, saying that he had saved her life not once but twice. Her sincerity warmed Yurin's heart. He replied that protecting her had simply been natural. As they walked, Ilya explained that earlier that morning, she had returned to the battlefield with soldiers to recover the remaining bodies. The devastation was far worse than she had imagined, and seeing it made her realize that without Yurin's help, she would have died there as well. Yurin listened silently, feeling the weight of her words. But Ilya did not allow despair to linger. She vowed to train harder than ever, to become a warrior strong enough to surpass every obstacle. Yurin smiled inwardly, knowing this was the moment she would begin her transformation, the spark that would lead her toward the legendary Sword Emperor trait. Before long, they arrived at the warp circle prepared by her father. Though the Marcus estate was nearby, the Marquis had arranged for magical transportation to make the journey swift. The mages began their chant, and in an instant, the world shifted. When Yurin opened his eyes, they stood before a vast, elegant estate. He was taken aback by the sudden change in scenery, while Ilya calmly welcomed him to her home. Leading the way inside, she moved with practiced grace. Girinox followed, unable to hide his awe, whispering to Yurin that he had never seen anything so grand. Yurin, though feeling slightly dizzy from the teleportation, composed himself and reminded himself that soon he would meet her father, just as in the original story. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of polished wood and noble luxury. Yurin silently thought that this would finally be his chance to taste the refined food of the upper class. When they entered the grand dining hall, Ilya's father, Marquis Marcus, was already waiting. With a powerful presence, he invited Yurin forward and told him to sit comfortably, saying there was no need for formality. Yurin obeyed respectfully. The Marquis began by thanking him, first not as a nobleman, but as a father whose daughter's life had been saved. Yurin replied humbly, saying it had been only natural to protect her. Soon, the chef arrived, placing a dish before him with great care. Yurin's anticipation grew, until he realized the dish was Tyrian soup. Though richer than the Rox family version, it was still the same simple meal he had eaten daily before. His excitement dimmed, though he managed to hide his disappointment. The Marquis proudly explained that the Marcus family, too, held the custom of eating Tyrian soup after every battle, as both a symbol of honor and nourishment. Left with no choice, Yurin began eating, thinking wryly that nothing about it impressed him. After all, he had once survived on poisoned Tyrian soup. This was hardly a delicacy. As the meal continued, Marquis Marcus suddenly asked the question that made Yurin nearly choke. He asked when Yurin planned to marry his daughter. Ilya flushed red and looked down in embarrassment. Yurin quickly realized that the Marquis was testing him. In the original story, Marcus's affection toward him had been negative, but now something had clearly changed. Deciding to meet the test head-on, Yurin declared that he wished to marry Ilya immediately. His boldness deepened her blush, her heart pounding at his words. But before the moment could stretch, Yurin clarified that he was not yet the official heir of his house. Once regarded as a scoundrel, he still had much to prove. He said with conviction that he would change, become someone truly worthy of Ilya, and only after earning the heir's title would he ask for her hand. His sincerity touched Ilya deeply. Her father, however, remained unconvinced. Marcus leaned forward and asked whether Yurin truly believed he could surpass his brothers, who were known to be prodigies. Yurin met his gaze without hesitation and replied with absolute certainty that he could, and would. The Marquis' stern demeanor softened into a faint smile. He admitted he admired Yurin's determination and declared that he would support his growth. Then his tone shifted as he revealed that communication had already come from the Rox family. The news stunned Yurin. Marquis explained that word of his deeds had spread quickly through magical channels and that his father wished to speak to him directly. Once they finished their meal, Marquis said he would personally lead Yurin to the communication chamber. Yurin thanked him, though he noticed Ilya sulking quietly beside him, for reasons he couldn't quite place. Regardless, it seemed he had left a strong impression on her father. Later that day, Yurin entered the communication room. The circle activated, and his father's projection appeared before him. A vivid magical likeness. The older man's face was thunderous with anger as he began shouting, his voice echoing through the chamber. Yurin hurried to apologize, trying to calm him. Beneath the anger, however, was genuine concern. The Marquis eventually asked if Yurin was injured. Yurin assured him he was fine. Then came the question that mattered most, whether it was true that he had saved Ilya and slain the orc warrior. Yurin admitted that it was, though he downplayed it as luck. His father fell silent for a moment, then said he would hear the full account upon Yurin's return. Finally, he asked when Yurin planned to come home. Yurin answered that he would return the day after tomorrow. At that, his father gave one final order. That Yurin should bring his brothers with him. The command left Yurin frozen in disbelief, unsure of what awaited him next. The next scene unfolded in a lavish salon of the Marquis estate, sunset spilling gold across fine drapes. 3 figures sat around an ornate table, the mustached Marquis Marquis at ease on the central sofa, Ilya poised beside him, and Yurin sitting upright across from them. The Marquis remarked with mild surprise that Yurin intended to leave as soon as tomorrow. He continued softly, saying that it would be nice if he stayed longer since it had been so long since their last meeting. Yurin responded respectfully, explaining that he would like to, but his father had entrusted him with a task. The Marquis waved his hand with his usual generosity, declaring it a shame and promising to prepare warp magic for an easier journey. Yurin chuckled lightly, concealing his thoughts behind a polite smile. Leaning forward, he said with quiet determination that he was grateful but would decline. The Marquis raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Yurin clarified that he preferred to travel and train the hard way, rather than depend on warp. The Marquis broke into a grin, saying that he truly had changed, and that he looked forward to seeing how much stronger he would become. Ilya gave him a gentle smile to which he nodded with calm confidence, thanking her. As she turned away, a subtle smile touched her lips. Watching her, he thought with faint amazement that she was smiling again. Perhaps she genuinely approved of his answer this time. Yet there is a deeper reason behind his refusal of the warp. The next morning, beneath a bright sky, he stood at the estate gates with his cloak fastened. With crisp energy, he called over his shoulder for Girinox to follow. Girinox, pack slung over one shoulder, asked carefully if they were heading to the capital. When Yurin nodded, Girinox pointed down the main road and said that this was the way. Yurin shook his head, explaining that they had another stop first. He pointed toward a distant mountain ridge beside the Marquisate and stated that their destination lay there. Girinox's eyes widened, asking if that was not the dragon's lair. Yurin repeated the name thoughtfully. Girinox nodded eagerly, saying that he had visited once before opening his forge, and asked with childlike curiosity if the young master planned to make a wish there. Yurin cut him off coldly, saying no. A sly smile crossed his lips as his thoughts turned inward. He was going there not to make a wish, but to claim a treasure. A treasure that only he knew about, one originally meant for the protagonist of the story. The two trekked down the dirt path, boots striking rhythmically as the estate's polished roads gave way to forest. Their destination was the ancient cave known as the Dragon's Lair, once home to dragons long ago. They climbed a rise to find the cavern's vine-draped mouth, where early visitors were already leaving offerings. Girinox gawked, saying that it was still early and yet so many people had come to pray. Worried, he asked if with so many around, there would be any treasure left. Yurin, unfazed, glanced at the glittering trinkets scattered near the entrance and remarked that those were all fakes. Girinox blinked, confused. Yurin stepped closer to the vine-curtained entrance, scanning the stonework with a smirk, and concluded quietly that the world was full of hidden things. Passing through the praying crowd, he motioned for Giranox to follow, saying they would take the path around the mountain. Giranox stumbled over his agreement and hurried after him. They climbed over uneven rocks and along a narrow ledge until Giranox, panting, pointed at a bare cliff and said that there was nothing there. Yurin fell silent, eyes sharpening as realization struck. He stepped to an irregular stone slab and thought to himself that this must be it, the hidden entrance he had designed himself, shaped like a car door handle. Glancing around to make sure no one was nearby, he pressed his palm to the stone and thought that opening it was just like opening a car door. The rock vibrated, a seam cracked open. Giranox stumbled back, exclaiming in disbelief. Yurin smiled faintly and told him to follow. They slipped through the narrow gap, which sealed behind them with a deep rumble. Inside, the air glowed with soft light from moss and old sconces. Giranox gazed around in awe, saying that it was brighter than he had imagined. He darted toward a cluster of shining crystals, exclaiming that they must be gemstones. Yurin stopped him sharply, warning that touching them would trigger a trap. Giranox froze and asked what kind of trap. Yurin, studying the patterns, answered calmly that it would likely turn the entire cave into a sea of fire, and both of them would be burned alive. They moved cautiously deeper, Yurin warning that many other traps awaited and instructing Giranox to stay close. Giranox nodded nervously. Their careful steps led them into a wide chamber centered around a low stone pedestal. Yurin said that they had arrived. Giranox circled the pedestal in wonder, saying that it was impressive but empty. Yurin gestured toward it and asked if he knew what lay beneath. Giranox, baffled, stammered that he did not. Yurin explained that this false dragon's lair ended there, but beyond that wall he could sense the energy of those praying outside. That right now, those people were unknowingly bowing toward them. Giranox could only murmur in confusion. With a single clap, Yurin announced that it was time to see the treasure. Giranox echoed the word in surprise. Kneeling, Yurin pulled a hidden handle beneath the altar. A deep rumble followed, and the stone lid slid aside, revealing several packed sacks. Giranox gasped in awe, recognizing them as gold coins. Yurin reached inside and lifted a small black box, declaring that this was worth far more than gold. Opening it, light spilled over his fingers as an interface identified the item. Warrior's Jade. Rebirth Effect. An artifact essential for power and growth. He snapped the box shut and briskly ordered Giranox to load the gold into a magic pouch. The man obeyed immediately. They emerged into daylight, weaving through the departing travelers. Giranox asked where they would go next. Yurin mentioned that warps to Ascastle's Tower of Magic departed from here. Giranox nodded in understanding. Giranox smiled faintly, remarking that even this early, the roads were full of people, and laughed softly. Then, suddenly, Yurin's face tensed. His breath hitched. A cold sense of dread washed through him as he thought that something was wrong. From the crowd, a hooded figure approached, its presence radiating suffocating pressure. He immediately invoked the Eye of the Creator. Recognition struck like lightning. The woman before them. She should not have appeared yet. He reeled inwardly, insisting that it was impossible, that she was supposed to appear only in the latter half of the story. Giranox called to him anxiously, asking what was wrong. Yurin's pulse quickened as he assessed her overwhelming aura. With cold clarity, he concluded that she was an existence he could not possibly defeat. His decision came instantly and without hesitation. He had to get away from here, and fast. Yurin dashed off, insisting he was starving, and Giranox hurried after him, urging him to slow down. Far behind them, a woman cloaked in black turned her head, drawn by the noise as if something about the moment mattered to her. Later, inside the vast walls of Aas Castle, Yurin sat on his bed, troubled by a nagging sense that something was off. He kept thinking about the strange figure he had seen earlier and felt she belonged far later in any story he knew. The thought left a deep frown on his face. He wondered why such a powerful being had appeared so early and in such a place. His eyes drifted to a shining pill resting in a box. He considered the possibility that the creature had been seeking the treasure from the divine dragon cave, a plot meant for much later. It dawned on him that the story he remembered was shifting in unexpected ways. To make things worse, he had no idea where the real protagonist was or what they were doing. There had been no hints, no sightings, nothing. Pushing the worry aside, he reached for the pill. As soon as he swallowed it, a sharp heat tore through him and a surge of blue energy raced along his veins. He dropped into a cross-legged position, focusing on guiding the overwhelming force. A system message announced that his transformation had begun. Another followed, stating his body was strengthening. He knew he needed power, and he needed it quickly. Time passed in silence while he meditated. Morning light eventually slipped through the window, and when he opened his eyes, a new message greeted him. It declared that he had become a heavenly martial body. He whispered to himself with a wide grin that he had hit the jackpot. This was the legendary physique praised in countless tales, perfect for any physical pursuit involving blades or fists. It even granted the ability to copy any technique after seeing it just once. He jumped to his feet, feeling lighter and stronger. At that moment a knock sounded, and Jiranox asked from outside if he could enter. Yurin allowed it. Jiranox stepped in, ready to mention breakfast, but froze instead. He stared at Yurin and stammered that the young master seemed to have grown taller overnight. Yurin tried to brush it off, claiming Jiranox must be imagining it. Jiranox refused to back down, explaining that as a blacksmith he judged measurements with precision. He insisted that Yurin had been 178 centimeters the day before and now appeared to be 182. Still uneasy, Yurin muttered that Jiranox's sharp eye was nothing to joke about. After getting ready and finishing breakfast, they headed to the Grand Magic Tower. The receptionist greeted them kindly and asked how he could help. Yurin said he wanted to use the warp gate. The man smiled as he asked where they needed to go. Yurin answered that they were heading to the capital. The man's smile faded, and he explained that access to the capital was restricted. He added that the city belonged to the nobility and that ordinary people had no right to enter without special permission. Without hesitation, Yurin revealed who he was. He stated that he was Yurin Rox, eldest son of the Marquis family, and that the man behind him was his personal blacksmith, Jiranox. Magicians nearby overheard and gathered around him. They recognized him as Lord Yurin, the Steel Mage. Yurin, slightly embarrassed, scratched the back of his head and admitted that this was indeed who he was. The magicians crowded closer, asking if it was true he could fling iron balls endlessly, how they exploded, what formulas he used, and how he chose his targets. Before he could answer, a wooden staff struck the floor with a sharp sound. In an instant, Yurin and Jiranox disappeared and reappeared in a luxurious hall. They looked around in confusion, wondering where they had been taken. An old man apologized nearby, explaining that his student had behaved rudely. Yurin, not recognizing him, asked who he was. The old man, dressed in a magician's uniform and holding a staff crowned with a glowing red orb, introduced himself. He said his name was Yubian, head of the AAS Castle Magic Tower Council. Yurin's expression tightened as he recognized the name. He remembered creating Yubian as a character for fun. On the surface the man looked like a gentle elder, but Yurin knew that when angered he became a merciless killer who removed anyone who annoyed him. Yurin felt a chill at the thought of meeting two dangerous figures in such a short time. Yubian then stated he would warp them straight to the capital from this very room. Yurin thanked him. Yubian walked toward the warp machine, then paused and looked back with a dark smile, saying he had a feeling they would meet again soon. The idea alone made Yurin grimace. He silently wished never to see the man again. Suddenly lightning struck the tower, and a moment later the warp activated, hurling them to the capital. As they walked through the streets, Jiranox gasped at the elegant buildings and the fine clothing worn by the citizens. Yurin handed him money and told him to buy better clothes for himself. Eventually they reached the Royal Knight Academy, a place built like a grand university. Yurin approached the gatekeeper and requested entry. The guard asked for his name and the name of the person he intended to visit. Yurin stated he was Yurin Rox and that he was looking for his brother Colin Rox. The guards led him through. As he walked deeper inside, someone called his name from the side. A handsome man with silver hair approached. Yurin confirmed that he was indeed Yurin Rox. The man studied him with a sharp gaze and asked if he was the same Yurin Rox who had defeated the orc warrior. Yurin realized how fast stories traveled within the capital's walls. The man's lips curved into a faint smile as he remarked that Yurin must possess remarkable strength. Yurin felt a flicker of surprise at how casually the man spoke to him. He replied politely that the compliment was generous, then asked for his name. The man introduced himself as Carrick Ilian, second son of the Duke Ilian family, and added that he was a close friend of Colin. He then turned and guided Yurin onward, saying they were going to meet Colin. Still, Yurin sensed something unusual about Carrick. He quietly told Jiranox to remain where he was, then followed Carrick deeper into the academy. As they walked, Carrick spoke again. He says that he has already heard the rumors that Yurin did not face the orc warrior alone, but fought with Lady Aaliyah at his side. He explains that Lady Aaliyah's strength is widely known, that she is a rising knight, yet Yuren's role in that battle was the truly surprising part. He goes on, saying that very little is actually known about Lord Yuren and asking if he really uses magic during his fights. Yuren answers that he does not, that he is not a mage. At this, a faint, sly smile flickers across Carrick's face. Carrick leads on in silence, leaving Yuren to brood. Yuren wonders what the man is plotting and questions whether he really saw that smirk or imagined it. Eventually, Carrick brings him to a huge training hall, its floor patterned with circles and filled with students drilling sword forms, their blades flashing in the light. A blue-haired student pauses his practice and approaches Carrick. Carrick asks him if he has seen Colin. The student stammers that Carrick himself has just taken Colin to see a professor. Irritation surges through Yuren as he realizes Carrick has already pulled Colin away somewhere else and brought only him here. The blue-haired student then glances at Yuren and asks who the man behind Carrick is. Carrick immediately answers that this is Lord Yuren Rox, Colin's older brother, and says that he is the one who helped subdue the orc warrior alongside Lady Aaliyah. With a touch of showmanship, he adds that Lord Yuren is not a mage at all and clarifies that this means Yuren fights purely with his own strength, just like the rest of them. Curiosity erupts. Students crowd around Yuren, firing questions one after another. Some say that they heard he fights with daggers. Others ask if it is true he throws strange balls and even butterflies in combat. Acting as their spokesman, Carrick suggests that perhaps Lord Yuren would be kind enough to demonstrate his skill to satisfy everyone's curiosity. Annoyance and anger coil in Yuren's chest, but he finally agrees. He and a student named Mealy step into the center of the hall while the others form a ring around them. Carrick announces that Mealy's ability is about average for their group. When Carrick notices the wooden sword in Yuren's hand, he asks in surprise if Yuren had not said he used daggers. Yuren explains that, since this is not a real fight, he will use a sword instead. Carrick, still taken aback, nods and says that they should give it their best. Yuren studies the faces in the crowd and realizes they're all high-ranking nobles. He senses how they have been looking down on him from the moment he arrived, dismissing him because he uses daggers instead of swords. He tells himself that this will not matter for long. He decides to use this chance to test the power of his heavenly martial body. An invisible force hums faintly around him as he steps forward with his wooden sword. Across from him, Mealy practically swells with confidence and declares that he will grant Yuren the first move. With nothing to lose, Yuren advances. He raises his sword in a simple overhead guard and brings it straight down. Mealy, expecting something intricate instead of such a plain and seemingly slow attack, is briefly stunned, then hurriedly lifts his own sword to block. The wooden blades collide. Mealy's strength proves completely insufficient. Yuren's strike drives the other sword back so hard that it smacks into Mealy's face. A collective gasp ripples through the hall. Carrick and the students stare, stunned, as Mealy collapses to the floor, a lump already forming on his forehead, defeated by a single basic strike. To save face, Carrick quickly claims that Mealy must have simply lowered his guard. Still eager for more, he asks Yuren for another match and calls out a student named Rula from the crowd. He introduces Rula as a mid to upper level fighter, much stronger than Mealy, and warns him not to repeat Mealy's mistake. Rula responds confidently, insisting that no one should compare him to that muscle pig Mealy. Yuren and Rula take their stances. At Carrick's signal, the duel begins. Rula charges the instant it starts. To Yuren's enhanced senses, the rush appears painfully slow, a clear demonstration of how far his heavenly martial body has elevated him. He repeats the same basic technique. He lifts his sword overhead, then brings it down in a clean, direct line toward Rula. Rula tries to block, raising his sword to intercept, but Yuren's strength is overwhelming. Rula's blade is forced back, once again smashing into its owner's face. Carrick stands frozen, completely shocked, while Rula crumples like Mealy before him. Yuren remains standing, looking calmly down at the defeated student. Inwardly, he thanks his heavenly martial body for the tremendous increase in strength, speed, and reflexes that has carried him far beyond normal human limits. He then remarks with a cold hint of mockery that the Knight Academy seems to produce only weak fighters. The comment hits Carrick hard. Stung by the insult, he immediately issues another challenge. He declares that this time Yuren's opponent will be the strongest fighter present, himself. Yuren responds with quiet confidence and tells Carrick to brace himself. They both ready their weapons. Carrick gathers his inner energy, muscles tightening, then bursts into motion, circling Yuren at high speed and leaving blurred afterimages around the arena. The display impresses the watching students. Yurin, however, remains unmoved. He stands firm and simply waits. The moment Carrick thinks he spots an opening, he lunges in to strike. Yurin's sharpened senses, enhanced by his heavenly martial body, read the incoming blow perfectly. With a small, precise step back along a subtle angle, he slips out of the line of attack. Once again, he raises his sword high and brings it down with crushing force. Carrick tries to block, but Yurin's raw power smashes through his defense and slams into his head. Carrick goes down, defeated like the others. Yurin stands over him, victorious, while the students stare in stunned silence, struggling to accept what they have just witnessed. That silence is broken when a voice from behind the crowd asks what is happening and why everyone is gathered there. At the sight of the newcomer, some students murmur that Lord Colin has arrived. Colin surveys the scene in confusion and asks again what exactly is going on. His eyes fall on Yurin, whom he does not recognize, and he asks who this stranger is. Yurin looks at him, thinking quietly that this is the one, the sword prodigy, his younger brother Colin Rocks. A purple-haired man steps forward and explains to Colin that the unfamiliar figure standing before them is actually Yurin, his own older brother, who has come to see him. Colin blinked at the declaration, glancing around in confusion before asking where his brother was. The purple-haired man, just as bewildered, pointed straight at Yurin and exclaimed that he was standing right in front of them. Colin scoffed, convinced it had to be a joke. He said that there was no way this tall, sharp-featured man could be the same Yurin he remembered. But as he studied Yurin more closely, his disbelief faltered. His eyes widened, and a trace of unease crossed his face as he asked how Yurin could have changed so drastically. Yurin answered calmly, saying he had only lost some weight. Colin stared, stunned. It was obvious the change was far more dramatic. Yurin had not only slimmed down but had somehow grown noticeably taller as well. Yurin added casually that the height had come with the weight loss. Colin's gaze drifted to the unconscious students on the floor. He asked what had happened to them. The purple-haired man stepped in and explained everything that had unfolded. With every detail, Colin's disbelief grew. By the end, he looked at Yurin again and asked if the rumor about him catching an orc warrior was also true. Yurin answered with a steady nod. A storm of emotions twisted through Colin. Before he could sort any of it, Yurin's tone dropped into something cold. He demanded to know how Colin could speak so disrespectfully to his own older brother. Colin shouted back that he simply couldn't believe Yurin had become this strong. Yurin narrowed his eyes and asked if Colin intended to go all out against him. That only fueled Colin's resentment. He snapped that he had never truly considered Yurin an older brother and insisted the only advantage Yurin ever had was being born 2 years earlier. A cold rage lit in Yurin's eyes. He stepped forward in open challenge, saying that if Colin felt that way, he should come at him. Colin let out a mocking laugh and said that was exactly what he wanted. But before he could move, Yurin stopped him and suggested they make a bet. He stated that the loser would owe the winner one wish. Colin hesitated, then nodded with determination and told Yurin to get ready. He motioned for a wooden sword while the purple-haired man leaned in again, whispering quickly, likely explaining how Yurin had flattened the other students. Once the match began, Colin released a powerful aura, showing he intended to fight at full strength. Yurin acknowledged this silently, almost approving. Colin was undeniably talented. He wielded swift sword techniques at level 2, quick movement at level 2, and carried the rare Sword Emperor trait, an innate gift for swordsmanship. Yet beneath all that skill, his hostility toward Yurin was ice cold. Colin lunged forward in a burst of speed. Yurin watched the charge with practiced calm, calculating every angle. No matter how he assessed it, he knew he wouldn't lose. With a fluid small dragon step, he slipped to the side of Colin's attack and moved to counter. But unlike the earlier matches, Yurin chose not to finish this instantly. He intended to teach Colin, not crush him in a single blow. The spar stretched on for 10 relentless minutes, swings, dodges, counters, and clean strikes landing again and again on Colin. The students who had first watched in shock now stared in open awe, unable to deny Yurin's absolute dominance. At last, exhausted and frustrated, Colin admitted defeat. His dismissive tone still irritated Yurin, who responded with a light but pointed tap of the sword. This time Colin winced, tears forming as he pleaded for Yurin to stop. Yurin pointed his wooden blade at him and stated firmly that if Colin acted out again, the next session would be twice as harsh. Thoroughly humbled, Colin stood straighter. Then Yurin issued his next command. From now on, whenever Colin stood before him, he was to address him as great older brother. Colin stared in shock and said it might be too much. Yurin raised his sword slightly, a simple gesture asking if Colin truly wished to refuse. Fear flickered through Colin, and he instantly corrected himself, addressing Yurin exactly as ordered. With the spar over, Yurin announced that they were leaving. Colin, still dazed, asked where they were going. Yurin explained that their destination was the Empire, where their youngest brother Rayon lived. Some time later, a shimmering portal inside a soaring magic tower delivered them straight into the Empire's capital. Girinox observed the teleportation with awe, marveling again at how the magic tower could move people across entire nations so effortlessly. Yurin told him that the tower was a neutral force present in every country, a constant and powerful structure shared across the continent. The city around them looked strikingly modern, grand buildings rising everywhere in bold architecture. Their path eventually brought them to the gates of the Empire Knight Academy. Outside it, Yurin told Colin to go fetch Rayon. Colin agreed, only to stop when Yurin gave him a pointed look. Realizing his mistake, he quickly corrected himself and addressed Yurin as great older brother. A short while later, Colin returned with Rayon. Yurin lifted a welcoming hand. Rayon's eyes widened in shock as he took in Yurin's taller, sharper figure. He asked cautiously if this truly was Yurin. Yurin smiled and confirmed it. Rayon said that he had already heard some of what happened from their second brother. Yurin nodded, pleased, and told him they should head home. But Rayon's expression darkened. He said that a serious problem had arisen. The Empire's capital was under emergency lockdown. People could enter, but no one could leave. He explained the reason. At dawn the previous day, the Crown Prince had been assassinated. Yurin's eyes widened at the news. Colin asked for confirmation, and Rayon repeated that the assassination was real and had thrown the capital into chaos. Colin scoffed, saying he couldn't imagine anyone managing such an attack inside a fortified royal castle. At that moment, Yurin sensed something off. He scanned their surroundings and confirmed his suspicion. Guards were everywhere, tense and alert, their patrols doubled. The same heavy question seemed to hang over everyone. How could this have happened? Rayon leaned closer, ready to share a quieter, more unsettling detail. Rumors had already spread through the Empire. Rayon explained that the Crown Prince's fiancée, a princess from a neighboring kingdom, had been visiting for several days. The prince, eager to impress her, had summoned her to the training grounds to display his martial skill. When his performance ended and he walked toward her applause, a jagged stone spike burst from the ground without warning and pierced him clean through. Priests rushed forward, but there was nothing to save. He died instantly. Colin, shocked, asked how magic could be used inside the palace when it was strictly forbidden. Rayon confirmed this and said that was exactly why the Magic Tower elders had been called in. Everything had fallen into chaos, and the idea of the Crown Prince being killed in front of his own fiancée was almost unthinkable. The words stone spear jolted Yurin. He recognized the technique. He knew who used it and, worse, he knew exactly where that assassin should be at this point in the story. They were not supposed to appear this early. Dread crawled up his spine. He tried to steady himself, reminding his racing thoughts that he now had the heavenly martial body. He and the true protagonist still had time to grow, he insisted to himself, even as doubt gnawed at him. Yurin called out to Colin and Rayon. Colin responded brightly, adding great older brother as instructed, which made Rayon stare in confusion. Rayon asked why Colin kept attaching grade to Yurin's name. Colin shivered and begged him not to question it. Yurin then asked about the best inns nearby. Rayon listed two, Dragon's Tears and Giant's Oath. Yurin immediately decided on Dragon's Tears. He instructed both of them to request leave, then head to the Magic Tower and file departure applications for all four of them. With the Rock's family name, he assured them, the process would be quick. He told them to wait for him at the inn. When Rayon asked where he was going, Yurin only smiled faintly and said he was off to meet an old friend. As he walked away, he added that they should not bully Girinox. Both brothers froze at the implication that Yurin actually had friends. Soon after, Yurin stood before a lavish building. From the shadows of a nearby alley, he identified it as Flamberge, a noble exclusive bar with a notorious reputation. He retrieved the outfit he had prepared, then stepped out dressed as a proper noble, one he truly was. He tapped his ring and called for Agnes. Agnes's voice snapped awake, irritated that he had disturbed her. Yurin apologized quickly. He asked her to disguise his face. Agnes, surprised, questioned how he knew the ring even had that function. Yurin said he simply guessed. Agnes then asked whom he wanted to look like. Just then, a nobleman stepped out of the bar. Yurin told her to disguise him as that man. The ring melted into a shimmering gel and splashed across his face, wiping away his features entirely before reshaping them into the exact likeness of the exiting noble. Yuren approached the entrance. The guards stared and said he thought he had just left moments ago. Yuren replied in an easy tone that he simply couldn't resist coming back for more drinks. The guard ushered him inside with a friendly warning not to overdo it. Yuren settled at an empty table among the lively crowd. As Viscount Veer, he was greeted by a waiter who welcomed him back. Yuren told him to bring whatever he had been drinking earlier. Only after the waiter left did Yuren release a quiet sigh of relief. His infiltration had worked. He focused his internal energy, sharpening his hearing until the overlapping conversations separated into clear voices. Gossip, complaints, flattery, hundreds of topics drifted through the air. He honed in on one voice. A girl crying at the bar, lamenting that she had been abandoned, and then learning her former partner had died. She spoke to the bartender, a brown-haired girl confessing her grief while the bartender tried to comfort her. He said that new love helped forget old pain and told her she would find someone better. She thanked him, saying the talk had eased her heart. Yuren kept listening. A sudden idea struck him. Using sound transmission, he directed his voice into her mind, asking if she had enjoyed her time with the Crown Prince. She gasped and demanded to know who was speaking and where they were. A heartbeat later, the entire bar began to shake. The ceiling cracked. The noble's laughter turned into horrified screams. With a deafening collapse, the once grand bar fell into rubble while the untouched buildings on either side only made the destruction more jarring. Yuren burst free of the collapsing structure, landing before the stunned gatekeeper. Terror flooded him as he faced the girl. Stone pillars erupted from the ground around her, merging with her body in monstrous fashion. A system panel appeared before Yuren's eyes. It identified her as envy, one of the 7 deadly sins. Her affection level read murderous intent. Yuren instantly understood she was not human and that she carried terrifying power. Her voice twisted into something hateful as she promised she would tear him apart. Fear surged through Yuren's chest. He wondered if he had any chance of surviving what stood before him. He forced himself to stay steady. He reminded himself that this confrontation was exactly why he had come. He removed his disguise and judged that he first needed a proper weapon. His false middle-aged face peeled away, revealing his true, youthful features. Power gathered in his hand, and he made a mental note that once this was over, they should reclaim the apostle's corpse and forge it into a dagger. Envy's eyes brightened with interest as she watched his transformation. She chuckled that this must be his real form, added that he was surprisingly handsome, and declared that she would take him alive. She lunged forward on her stone limbs, screeching that he would become her prize. Yuren sprinted to meet her, channeling mana into the dark blade. He drove a direct strike toward her chest. The dagger hit her stone shell with a sharp clang and rebounded without leaving a mark. His stomach dropped. The attack had bounced off like nothing. Grinding his teeth, he decided there was no choice but to escalate. He hurled the dagger and unleashed black iron explosion. Black streaks ripped through the air as a pillar of multicolored light descended on Envy, swallowing her in a furious blast. For a breath he staggered back, momentarily convinced he had won, until the fire guttered and a warped voice drifted through the smoke. She stepped out grinning, remarking that the power simply faded and that he wielded some very amusing magic. Yuren's breath hitched. Sweat stung his brow. He realized he had burned through most of his options already. Then he drew a butterfly-shaped talisman, a finishing move strong enough to kill an orc warrior in a single hit. He flung it and activated Bloodfire Palm, then added Curving Shot, sending a storm of blazing orange butterflies spiraling through the night. The fiery insects looped around buildings and slammed against Envy's limbs, erupting in bursts of heat. But inside his mind he keeled over in despair, mumbling that he had drained every scrap of energy and was now completely doomed. In reality, he turned to flee, gasping, only to see Envy still advancing untouched. He muttered a curse as townsfolk screamed and scrambled through the rubble, shouting that a monster had appeared. Watching their panic, he concluded grimly that retreat was not an option. If he ran, more would die. He vowed to hold out until the capital guard arrived. Envy responded with a swarm of stone spears, crimson edges streaking through the air. He kept dodging strike after strike. He exclaimed that the chaos was unreal and realized that if he kept dodging he would be killed. Though he had not mastered his technique, he decided he would trust his sword. He drew a long blade that drank in the moonlight and glowed faintly. He resolved to channel his inner energy directly into it and charged at Envy. Envy snarled that he was coming and launched another barrage. The swordsman met the spears head-on, his aura-coated blade cleaving through them one after another. As shattered stone crashed around him, He grinned through the dust and thought that if he could cut those spears, then he still had a chance. Across the plaza, Envy perched on her stone legs, amused. She said he was entertaining and added that she wanted to see how long he could keep it up. A fresh storm of spears rained down. Yuren raised his sword and braced himself. He noticed with alarm that the number of projectiles kept increasing. Envy laughed as she hurled another volley and taunted him to try blocking it. But in mid-taunt she suddenly stiffened, her voice cracking as she gasped that something was wrong with her body. System windows flashed before Yuren's eyes. He had been poisoning her throughout the fight. The notifications announced that extended poison had activated, that blood venom art had triggered a snake-type toxin, and that fire flame poison was burning through her insides. As she convulsed, he felt a fierce spark of triumph. There was finally a reaction. Another alert said she was paralyzed, but only for 1 second. He was inwardly panicking about how short that paralysis window was. Even so, Yuren knew he could not waste it. He activated Small Dragon's treasure, golden light sparking around his limbs. Empowered, he lunged at the frozen apostle. Envy's eyes widened as he closed in. A message flashed saying paralysis had reached 0, but Yuren was already airborne and urging himself to cut first. His blade carved a glowing arc across her torso, cracking open her stone shell. He hurled his dagger into the gap and released another black iron explosion, pouring in every drop of magic he had left. The dagger detonated inside her. Flame, stone, and dust tore through the street. When the shockwave faded, Yuren stood hunched, using his sword for support. He breathed that at last the attack had landed. He stared hard at the collapsed spider form, wondering if it was finished. The rubble shifted. A slick red mass dragged itself free of the shattered shell. Yuren recoiled, choking out disbelief as the naked flesh core lifted its head and pulsed with blue-black energy. Dark fire wrapped around it while a voice from inside told him to wait. He watched in horror, murmuring that this could not be happening. Then he remembered the truth he had forgotten. Apostles possessed multiple phases. A warning window blared that Envy was awakening into Phase 2, noting that each phase drastically increased power. A new stone body burst from the shell, Envy shouting the arrival of Phase 2 as her heavy legs crashed into the ground. She hummed low, then thrust out her arm and screamed for them to die. Rainbow-edged projectiles tore through the plaza. He dodged with a groan as he realized her attacks had grown far faster and far more chaotic. He ran over broken stone, spears slicing the air behind him. He clenched his jaw and cursed that at this pace he would die. Another streak of killing light whipped toward him. His eyes widened in shock, and the scene dissolved into a spray of red as the night was swallowed by blood.